The gift God gave him was to be neither a warrior nor a sorcerer, and not even a healer. A sharp, loud command for Rent to act. He nodded and grabbed the piggy bank tighter, shaking it slightly and preparing to do something. The guy's stern face, ready to cope with any danger, give confidence in his actions. He used the borrowed magic skill. A bright light enveloped him, illuminating the guy. The piggy bank's eyes lit up with fire, and something very similar to money flew out of its hole at such a speed that it could scratch someone. Rent stood bravely with the piggy bank in his hands, while money flew out of it at great speed. They flew in different directions, enveloping everything around them that they could reach. The girl in the witch's hat will forgive the guy to hurry, because the trinity that is fighting the monster can no longer cope. They really need the help of Rent's magic. The paper money flew sharply towards the guy with the heavy sword, dangerously approaching his back as if they were going to attack him, but their goal was to do the opposite, to give him new strength. They had fun with the guy, they became one with him. He sighed heavily with relief. Abruptly, the knight grabbed the sword tighter and cursed loudly for the monsters to attack. Determination began to shine in his eyes with renewed vigor. Now he was absolutely sure of his victory. Using all his magical power, he gave all his strength to an explosive blow. An explosion of enormous size covered the monster, leaving it no chance of survival. Rent was almost blown away by such a stream of wind. He closed his eyes, hiding from the wind, but the explosion was stronger, causing the guy's hair to fly in all directions, and dust and sand flew into his eyes. Gaius continued to stand there after his crushing victory. He was breathing heavily and catching his breath. He realized that he was able to win. He also held his sword tightly, standing in the dust after the explosion. The senior healer, smiled and said that the knight was the best. Guy, the senior warrior, smiled back and chuckled slightly. He was proud of himself. Misei, the senior mage, added that this time it would be easy for them to win. Rent sat on the ground looking at the heroes. He smiled. For him, a victory with one blow. It was very cool. The piggy bank lay on his knee, and the dust from the explosion slowly dissipated. The company suggests continuing this path to reach the end. Rent's profession is called Keeper of Magic. 5 years ago, the village of Alt. Little guy smiles brightly, shows the piece of paper, and shouts that his profession is a swordsman, a very cool profession. The guys next to him support him, saying that this is great. Someone says that Guy is already a D-rank adventurer. The guy proudly replied that he always wanted to be an adventurer and got what he deserved. Goro stood next to him, showed his leaf, and said that he was a blacksmith. Guy smiled and said that this was also very cool, and it was also an E rank. The boy said that he would fight with the weapon that he would forge, and the young blacksmith sadly replied that he also really wanted to go in search of adventure. In this world, when one turns 15, one can receive a gift from God at a special coming-of-age ceremony. Little Rent smiles and thinks about how strong he wants to be as an adventurer. Suddenly, a little girl appears nearby and turns to the guy to attract his attention. Rent was delighted to see his friend Misei. The girl reported that his name had been called at church. The atmosphere inside the church was both eerie and fascinating. Large doors, huge columns, people standing with tree branches. All of this could surprise anyone, but also drive them away. Rent looked around, realizing that absolutely everything here was very unusual for him. He reached the man, who greeted the young man with a kind smile on his face. The man addressed him like a holy father. The man handed him a parchment and told him to pray by the light of the altar. And he added that then the Creator would reveal the secret of his entire future life. Against the backdrop of tall windows with patterns of angels, Rent put the parchment to his forehead, mentally beginning to pray to receive his purpose in life. A crowd of teenagers stood at the entrance to the church, some waiting for friends, some for their turn to enter. Rent came out of the church. Misei was glad to see him and asked if he had finished. Guy was also very happy about the guy's appearance. They started asking him how everything went. They were too interested in what role the guy got. Rent awkwardly scratched the back of his head and showed his paper where the role of the Guardian of Magic was written. He explained that even the Holy Father was surprised, and it seemed that he had an S rank. This shocked everyone who was nearby. Guy was very surprised by such a high rank. He added that this was a very rare case. A crowd of people gathered behind him who also really wanted to look at Rent's leaf. The guy looked more closely and saw that Rent was the Keeper of Magic. Suddenly, his gaze dropped lower. He suddenly fell silent, thought, and shouted loudly that the guy's magic was 1,200 units. Guy shouted sharply that this couldn't be because his magic was only 20. The girl next to him replied that her magic was actually 13. The guy started shaking and asked what his strength was. Rent came closer and also wanted to take a look. He said that his power was to lend magic. The company nearby did not immediately understand what this meant. Ren explained that it was most likely a skill of transferring magical power to others. Guy sharply asked if he could really borrow the guy's magical powers and use them as much as he wanted. Misei came up from behind and said that it was really cool. The guy got scared because she came up so unexpectedly. She says that it is a very excellent gift and it is also S rank. Ren asked if she really thinks so. Misei smiled sweetly and congratulated the guy with all sincerity. The guy smiled shyly and thanked the girl. To be honest, borrowing from a magic keeper is just one of the skills. Essentially, it is the ability to store a little more magical power. In general, it is a general term for the energy expended when using a skill. Exhausted magic power is automatically restored during rest and sleep. There is a limit to the amount of magic power that can be stored. It can never be restored beyond this limit. But he can store the excess in the magic storage. Its capacity is equal to its maximum magic power, totaling 2,400 units. Rent lay on his bed, staring thoughtfully at the ceiling, thinking that he had no idea if he would ever be able to use his skills. He realizes that he wasn't even taught how to do this. The guy remembers how he was told that the most important thing in magic is the image. He turns his gaze to the shelf on which stood a very ordinary little piggy bank. This is his old piggy bank. He decided to take it and try to use it for his new abilities. Rent looks at the piggy bank and thinks that he will most likely be able to store magic in it, like coins. Suddenly, the piggy bank began to shine with a magical light. The guy realized that it really could be perceived as a piggy bank. He says that this piggy bank will not be for coppers, but for magic. Abruptly, he said that he would keep it in a piggy bank. Magic in the form of paper money began to fly into the piggy bank. On the street, someone was practicing magic using a fireball. Rent approached Misei from behind and decided to use borrowed magic, which surprised the girl. She felt her strength begin to return to her, which she happily told the guy magic had returned to her. The guy came closer and explained to the girl that in order to regain her strength, she needed to put her hand on the piggy bank and direct the flow of energy into it. Misei did just that, put her hand on it. The piggy bank began to glow with a magical light. Rent happily reported that the girl was doing everything right. Guy happened to be nearby and picked up the piggy bank and asked with a smile what it was. Rent replied that it was obvious and added that it was the best representation of the vault that he could come up with. Misei turned sharply to the guy to draw his attention to herself. She took a step closer and asked if the boy wanted to go on an adventure with them. The girl explained that they had planned to register a squad in the guild, she, Guy and Rent, and then they would see who else they could find. The guy was very surprised and looked at them with the hope that they were not joking. Guy was nearby, put his arm around his shoulder and said that now they definitely wouldn't have problems with magic. Rent explained that he wouldn't be able to use magic as much as he wanted. If he borrowed it, he would have to return it. The guy next to him replied that he understood everything. Misei smiled and said that Rent had talked about how much he dreamed of living a life full of adventure. Rent smiled brightly and answered positively. He asked sharply if they had chosen a name for the group. Guy answered confidently that they had chosen everything. The guy proudly raised the sword into the air and said that their name is the Sword of the Boundless Sky, and over time it will turn into a sword that cuts through the sky. Misei put her hand to her forehead and asked if the guy wanted to change his mind. Rent came closer and wanted to confess that for him it was very cool. Guy smiled brighter. The girl definitely didn't like it very much. They also have a healer L who will definitely be useful to their team and will be able to help in serious battles by healing their wounds. And so their adventures began. They worked at breakneck speed. Rent bestowed magical powers on everyone. The monsters died one after another thanks to teamwork, and also, the total amount of magical power they possessed was directly dependent on the total amount of units of those in the squad. At a local bar, men were discussing the Sky Boundless Sword Squad. One of them, while drinking a mug of beer, became interested in the topic of the dialogue. The men discussed that this squad had gone from the initial F rank and reached the C squad in just 2 years. They were really nimble. The man was really interested in the Sword of the Boundless Sky. Guy suggests that after such a successful completion of the task, they buy a new uniform for their adventures. Misei smiles brightly and says that it is very comfortable to move in this one. Elle says that she is also very happy. Rent looked at the team and asked what about him. He was still in the starting gear. Guy rudely replied that he did not need a new uniform since he did not fight directly. Elle added that it wouldn't be a bad idea to wash it because the guy smelled sour. Rent drooped. His gaze became sadder after such phrases in his direction. Compared to these three, its level grows much more slowly. Because his skill has special conditions, he who lends power must take it back. But in his case, he was getting closer to the team and wanted to say that the magic that the team took. Guy interrupted him and turned around abruptly with a stern expression on his face. Rent suddenly became embarrassed and said that he didn't mean anything like that, he just couldn't say it. Back then, when they were equal, they communicated freely and without problems, but now the whole team talks politely to each other, leaving Rent behind. When you grow up, you look at things differently and at your past beliefs too. Present tense. Elle slams her staff on the ground and shouts a spell to enhance magic. The monster suddenly attacks Misei. She quickly dodges the blow and manages to escape. The girl points her weapon at him, loudly shouting a fire tornado spell. The fire stroked the monster completely, hiding the monster within itself and slowly burning it. Guy stomps his foot and clenches his jaw, aiming straight at the monster. Swinging his sword, he conjures a vacuum scythe. The huge monster was defeated and lay in the water, completely motionless. Guy smiles broadly and throws his sword over his shoulder. His rank is B. Elle smiles brightly and says that they are having a very ordinary victory day. Her rank is B. Misei adds that they were really weak. Her rank is B. Rent stands behind and applauds the team with an admiring look for such a ride. His rank is S. Guy ignored him, raised his head proudly, and said that it was time for them to go to the guild to report to her. He was looking forward to his assessment. Misei asked if they had heard that people were saying that their team was the closest to an A-rank party. The guy didn't even doubt it. Rent turned around. Behind him in the ruins, he saw a chest. He called out to the team, saying that he had found a treasure chest. It was raining heavily outside, pounding the roofs of the houses. In a small hotel in one of the rooms, a single candle burned, illuminating a small space around itself. Rent sat in front of his team, sadness in his voice, not understanding what was happening. He looked at Guy, not believing his words at all. The guy interrupted him sharply, telling him not to make him repeat himself. He added that they had to climb to the very top. He concluded that they would recruit new adventurers and create and form squad 2. And Rent will be excluded. The guy's eyes became empty. Fear and disappointment were red in his eyes. Swallowing the lump in his throat, he asked uncertainly why him. He didn't understand why so suddenly. The whole team was smiling sarcastically, looking at him. They didn't care. All three of them suddenly showed the large bracelets on their arms, which shone brightly in the light of the small candle. Rent was surprised that they were wearing the bracelets from the chest he found. Guy explained that they had appraised it in the shop, and the owner himself was surprised, saying that it was a very rare item. He also added that this bracelet restores the owner's magic unit up to 1,000 units per day. The guy summed up that there were 3 bracelets, and that was much more than the guy could give them. Misei added that they needed magic, but it didn't necessarily have to be Rent's doing. The guy tried to defend himself, saying that with these bracelets he would be able to give more than 5,000 units of magic. Rent added that this way they would be able to use absolutely any magic and asked, "Isn't that so?" Guy abruptly stood up from the table. He began to say that it was for this very reason. Guy grabbed the guy by the neck sharply, lifting him into the air. Rent began to slowly choke. Looking sternly at the guy, he said that he would test him and ordered him to try to get out. Rent was suffocating. He couldn't even move. He wanted to get out, but he physically couldn't. Guy was still looking sternly straight at the guy, telling him to stop being smart because he didn't have that much magic. Rent quietly asks to stop. He wants to breathe air again. He can't do anything. He's weak. His eyes roll back, tears flow from them, and the guy no longer has any hope that they will let him go. He says that he is in terrible pain. He looks at Guy with pain, hoping that he will let him go. Slowly, the hand on the guy's neck loosened. Rent fell painfully to the ground, breathing heavily and trying to catch his breath. Elle laughed loudly, saying that the guy had a very funny face. He looked at his now former team with anger and slowly breathing, trying to catch his breath. Misei also looked at him sternly and asked what kind of look this was. He added that she completely agreed with Guy. And she asked sharply, does the guy really want her to feel sorry for him? Rent tried to say something, but the words treacherously stuck in his throat. He could not utter a word. He was consumed by resentment and anger. The guy couldn't bear it any longer and ran out of the building, consumed by resentment. Elle waved her hand at him with a sarcastic laugh and a cheeky smile and shouted goodbye after him. Guy smiled and said that finally there was one less problem, now they wouldn't have to suffer with him. Misei replied that this incompetent person should have been kicked out a long time ago. Guy laughed back and said that the girl was indeed cruel. Rent walked slowly, quickly getting wet in the pouring rain, a lump of resentment and anger at his former team stuck in his throat. He remembered Guy's wild smile who tried to strangle him, his hand clenched into a fist this time. There was nothing he could do in this situation. The power he was given was a great revelation to everyone. S-rank is a very unique gift. Just stand behind and distribute magical power. Unable to bear it, the boy threw away the piggy bank he was carrying on his shoulder, and it fell with a loud thud onto the ground, which was soaked by the rain. Rent looked sadly at the ground as the rain dripped down on her head. The weather seemed to pick up on his mood. The guy spoke into the void that he never wanted this. Remembering the faces of the Trinity, he realized that they were all. He wondered if he was truly incompetent. Was that why he had been kicked out? Tears gathered in Rent's eyes. He thought that if this was really so, then at least all the magic that I copy he once gave away. Unable to bear it any longer, he shouted into the emptiness of the rain, demanding that all the strength that had been taken from him be returned. He continued to stand silently in the deserted street under the heavy rain. Suddenly, a phrase sounded in the guy's head that he had fulfilled all the requirements for the evolution of the gift. Rent was surprised and the voice continued. He said that the storage evolved into an infinite storage of magic. The guy wondered where this voice came from. Out of nowhere, a little fairy appeared, calling Rento sir and congratulating him on his heat evolution. The boy was very surprised by such an unexpected turn of events. The little fairy happily congratulated the boy on the evolution of his gift and called him master. She smiled sweetly and dreamily said that she was very glad to meet him. He called it the most pleasant moment. Suddenly she came closer and said that she did not expect that she would have to wait 5 whole years after her master came of age. Rent's eyes widened. He pointed his finger at her and said timidly that she. And he asked loudly if she was a heat fairy. The trap smiled broadly and said that he had guessed correctly. He remembers the village priest telling him that there is a fairy who supports him and has a unique gift. The story turned out to be true. The girl slightly bowed her head and said that she was very pleased to meet you. Her name is the Magical Planner, but the guy can call her Mappy. The fairy smiled sweetly and said that she was looking forward to the opportunity to get to know each other better. Ren thought she was cute and wondered what he should say now. Suddenly, the fairy screamed loudly. She was very surprised by the guy's appearance and asked where he got such a shabby look. He did not immediately understand what was happening. Mappy took out an abacus and began to list an iron breastplate, a shabby cloth cloak, cloth trousers, and sharply asked, "What kind of sandals are these?" She put the bills up front and said sharply, 116 coins. That's exactly how much is needed to buy the guy more or less normal equipment. She added that if the guy wants to work, he needs to dress appropriately. Rent realized that she was kind of weird. The guy asked how his gift had evolved. The fairy replied that now was the time to check the parchment. Mappy explained that when a skill evolves, the contents of the parchment are also updated. Rent looked closely at his parchment and indeed saw the changes. Now his gift was called Infinite Magic Storage. He remembered that his former comrade's skills had also evolved, such as Guy, who was an ordinary swordsman, becoming an advanced swordsman. He noticed that his rank had become SSS and asked if there was anything higher than the regular S rank, to which the fairy giggled mysteriously. She pointed at something and motioned for the guy to look at it. An unknown symbol caught his attention. He asked the fairy what it was. Mappy replied that it was the infinity sign. She picked up his piggy bank and proudly said that now the boy did not have to worry about capacity, because now it could store an infinite amount of magic. Rent did not immediately understand the fairy's words and stood silently looking forward. At that moment, the realization of the whole problem dawned on him, and he suddenly understood the meaning of the word infinite. Mappy began to explain that there were 2 conditions for developing an infinite magic storage. First, the boy must have a certain amount of magic power. The girl perked up and said that the second condition was an extremely strong emotion. He had to wish with all his heart to return the debt. Rent remembered how he had just screamed. The girl suddenly said that it was a very simple condition and asked why it took the guy 5 years to do this. Rent shouted sharply that in reality everything was not so simple. The fairy smiled sarcastically. He suddenly drooped and said more quietly that he was very scared. The guy began to tell the story that he was very patient. He always tried to act in the interests of his former group. If he demanded the magic back, it always seemed to him that as soon as they got back on their feet, they would definitely return everything. Myra smiled and said that the guy was very kind. This greatly surprised the guy and made him happy. For the first time in a long time he was praised. The fairy sharply called him a kind local fool and smiled sarcastically. Rent did not like this and he expressed his displeasure. Mappy hugged him by the shoulders and said that it was nothing special and suggested that they see what else was new. The guy turned his gaze back to the parchment and began looking for new changes. He was confused by the number 2,678,087. He asked the fairy what kind of number it was because it really was huge. Mappy smiled slyly and said that this was the number of magical power that he lent to the team. Rent was surprised by such a huge number. He definitely did not expect to see such a huge number. The fairy clarified that this was for all 5 years. She added that the number below was the amount of magic he needed to collect, 1,435,837 units. She added that that much could be taken out in a whole year. This was his new forced collection skill. Rant's voice trembled as the realization slowly dawned on him that he could forcibly collect magical energy from debtors. He realized that he could get back all the energy that he had once given away. The fairy smiled slyly, looking at the guy who definitely liked this idea. The guy only now realized. Why did she have such a cruel face? He asked Marie loudly and abruptly how he could use this ability. The fairy tried to calm the boy down. She said that there are certain conditions for activation. For this, it is necessary to conclude a contract with the debtor. Rent emphasized this word for himself. Mappy said that there are types of forced return of magic, but they are complicated, although, if you think about it. The fairy sharply told the guy to leave it to her. Rent smiled at the fairy. He was ready to trust her. The two men who were walking past looked at the guy with distrust. They were waiting for the question, who is the guy talking to near the tree? They could not see the fairy, and it was a surprise for them that some boy was talking to the air. They decided not to bother the guy, and against the past, they considered it the best option. A new sunny day, the rain has ended. Again, a quiet hotel, from which Guy came out and said that yesterday evening had gone wonderfully. He put all unnecessary thoughts aside and told the guys that they needed to go to the guild and find a new comrade. Suddenly, something interrupted all his thoughts. Stood in front of them, his head raised proudly. This greatly surprised the team. They definitely didn't expect to see him here. Guy rudely asked why the guy would suddenly come back. Elle smiled, apologized, and reminded that they had already excluded the guy from the group. The swordsman agreed and added that there was no place for him here anymore. Misei said that the guy came just in time. She had some kind of bag in her hands, which she rudely threw to the guy. The bag fell at his feet. The girl said that he could take it. She added that the innkeeper had put in a lot of effort to collect this junk. Misei slowly drawled that they didn't know what to do with all this. Rent abruptly thrust the parchment in front of them. He named the huge number of magical powers that they had borrowed and informed the team about it. Guy didn't immediately understand, but the guy asked if they were ready to return absolutely everything that they had taken over the years. The team didn't like this wording. Misei asked what the guy was planning. Rent rudely ordered them to remain silent. He began to think that everyone has long known that if you borrowed, we need to return all this. Guy's expression conveyed a complete lack of understanding of the whole situation. Rent continued, saying that his gift was not some useless item like a bracelet on his arm. Guy wanted to start the thought by addressing the guy. He suddenly grabbed the guy by the clothes, lifting him off the ground. He looked the guy straight in the eyes and asked if he could really take everything back that easily. He definitely didn't like such rude treatment. Rent was scared. Mappy was flying not far from him. Guy rudely demanded that Rent show more respect to them. Elle giggled sarcastically. Rent tried to find the strength to say something. He really wanted to get his strength back. Guy threw the guy to the ground. Rent began to gulp air and replied that as the team in front of him said. Lying on the ground, he politely asked for all the magic that the team had taken from him to be returned. Guy stepped on his head and told him that they would never do that. He ordered the boy to never appear in front of them again. The girls behind him giggled evilly, looking at the pathetic sight of Rent's defeat. Disheveled and dirty, Rent lies on the ground, exhausted. Guy just walked past and rudely said goodbye to the guy. He turned around abruptly, raised his hand, and said with irony in his voice that they would settle the score another time. Rent continued to lie on the ground. He was hurt again. He slowly gave up sand with his hand from pain, anger, and resentment. He did not want to just leave it like that. He slowly opened his eyes and looked at the backs of his former team, breathing heavily. Suddenly, the Central News Agency spoke up. It reported that the debtor had been identified successfully and the contract had been created. The fairy flew closer and informed her master that now he could use his new skill. Rent stood up from the ground. Anger and resentment were visible in his eyes. He was ready to take the debt back. He activated his new skill, Forced Gathering. Walking slowly forward, the team discussed how annoying the guy was. Elle said that she was very surprised by the guy's attempt to return to them. Guy replied that now, after what he did to the guy, he should not return again. Yousei shared the thought that it was worth teaching him a lesson more strongly to make sure it worked. Guy smiled nastily and said that the girl was really cruel. She smiled and turned to Guy. Suddenly, magic in the form of paper money poured out of them, the same one that Rent had once given them. A hell of a huge amount of magical power flew away from the team at great speed. Yousei felt something strange for a second. Guy asked her what happened. The girl answered sharply that everything was fine. He assumed that the girl most likely felt Rent's gaze on her. Yousei didn't like that. She told him not to talk nonsense, and the whole team laughed merrily. There was a mysterious mark on Yousei's neck that was shining, leaving some kind of mark on her. Marie lowered her head slightly and asked him for forgiveness. Rent was surprised and asked what had come over the girl. She said that Guy seemed stronger to her than Rent. The guy didn't like it. The fairy added that it seemed so to her, and Rent called her discontentedly. Marie smiled sharply and said that she was just joking. The guy was not sure but relaxed a little after her words. Somewhere on the street, magical forces were flying in the form of paper money. They were aiming at a small window at the very top of the house to return to their native piggy bank. Suddenly, paper money in the form of magical power, which the whole team took, began to fly into the piggy bank at great speed. This really scared the guy. He was surprised and asked if it really worked. The fairy replied that the collection was successful and everything was exactly according to the contract. The waitress next to him looked at the guy strangely. Marie continued, saying that from now on, all of their accumulated magical power would automatically be collected into his piggy bank. Rent looked at the parchment and was surprised to see that the amount of magic in the vault had actually increased. Suddenly, a voice announced that the condition for a new skill had been met. The guy was no longer surprised by this voice in his head, because it had not sounded for the first time. The voice added that Rent had learned a new skill, a magical operation, and the fairy was nearby and noticed that the guy had learned a new skill. A magical operation skill that consumes the user's or storage's magical power and increases the user's maximum magical power in the current state. By spending 1,000 units, he will increase his maximum magic power by 1. The fairy rarely asked, "Is there something wrong?" Rent scratched his head awkwardly and said he thought it would be something cooler and more powerful. Marie smiled slyly and asked what the guy was talking about and added that it was a great skill for growth. The guy got scared and sharply agreed with her. He was scared by her smile. The fairy cleared her throat slightly. He already has an infinite supply, even if he increases his magic level now. He turned to the fairy and reminded her that she had said that there were methods of forced collection and asked if that was true. He asked what methods existed. The fairy smiled and said that she would explain in a few words. She began to explain, saying that there were 3 types of forced collection. The first is a one-time method of collecting all the magic at once. The second, payment in installments, is a method in which the number and volume of payments are agreed upon in advance. But the third. The fairy smiled sarcastically and explained that the third method, the method known as the gates to hell, is renewable fees. Rent did not understand anything. The fairy replied that this was the contract they had concluded today. The guy asked what was so scary about renewable fees. Marie replied that there were actually a lot of things. She began to explain that it was something like a sand trap from which one could not escape no matter how hard one tried, the most hellish method of collection. The girl added that it was just a fixed amount to pay and added mysteriously that almost rent was demolished. Isn't that the same as installment? The fairy explained that the installment plan, simply dividing the amounts into parts and further collection, even if daily payments are difficult, the debtor sees the goal in full repayment of the debt. She added abruptly that a renewable debt was something else entirely, and Rent's eyes widened, not understanding anything. She explained that even if a debtor borrows 100 or 10,000, the amount that the debtor pays back is the same each time. Rent became interested and the girl continued, deciding to explain using his former team as an example. The amount of power is 3,600. Recovery is 360, 10% of the amount every hour, per day is 8640 units, 3,000 that can be restored. The amount of magic power that can be collected in one day is 11,640. The fairy smiled as she ran her hand over the abacus and said that on the other hand, the amount that can be obtained is 1,435,837 units after the loan, of which 8% for 10 days. You can earn 115,000 mister at the end of the year, so. Rent interrupted her sharply and asked if he had to pay any percentage for using his skills. The girl continued to smile and said that of course the guy would have to pay, such is the power of the endless magical storage. The guy noticed that the fairy spoke like a money lender. Mappy added that if there is 11,640 every day, subject to collection, then it will be 116,400 in 10 days. The interest that is accrued is 115,000 in 10 days. Some kind of realization slowly came to Rent. The girl continued for him with a sinister smile, saying that the principal amount of the debt was hardly decreasing. She added that the slackers just keep paying interest, and when a new month begins, even more debts appear. The guy listened to all this with a shocked face. He asked the fairy loudly and sharply if they had really made such a pact. She simply smiled sarcastically and replied that it was so. Rent remembered that he left everything to the fairy's discretion. She replied that everything would be fine and he had nothing to worry about. The girl reminded that the guy's former team never thanked him, so it's high time they got what they deserved. The fairy continued, saying that he had been insulted and kicked out of the squad that they had all created together. Her tone of voice suddenly became rougher. She said that these scum were not worthy of pity. Rent was surprised by the sudden change and turned to the girl, appealing to her reason. The fairy's smile became wild, almost inhuman. He said that they simply had to track them down, crush them with force, plunge them into the abyss of despair and make them regret everything. The girl added that maybe they themselves were not competent. Rent called the fairy sharply to distract her from her crazy thoughts, and the girl reacted. The guy said that it scared him a lot. Mappy replied that she was just expressing her feelings. The people around did not understand why some guy suddenly started screaming. Rent replied that everything was not really like that. The fairy smiled sarcastically. Rent slowly lowered his head, descending into his thoughts. Mappy said that in fact the contract could be changed at any time. The guy understood everything. The girl started to think that if the guy ever had to apologize for this garbage, Rent replied that he would think about it. The fairy said that the boy was too kind. She thought sharply and then added that he was more likely a kind fool. Rent expressed his dissatisfaction with such a nickname and shouted at her to stop. A guild sign where the team was recruiting new members for their company. The girl pointed to herself and said that she was a natural-born thief and also very fast. The team replied that they did not need that. The dark-aged man said that his gift was dark magic and also that he was younger than he seemed at first glance. The team replied that they did not need extra worries about a decrepit old man. Guy suddenly stood up from his chair and sent everyone away, saying that the recruitment was over. He was indignant that everyone who came today was just a bunch of losers. Elthroat raised her chin and arrogantly said that no one suited their beautiful squad. The guy happily agreed with her thoughts. Miss A picked up some parchment and said that this adventurer looked very useful and specified that he was a sniper. Guy began to carefully examine the piece of paper in his hands. The guy noticed that he reminded him of someone, and very much so. He asked Miss A abruptly if she missed Rent. The girl lowered her head and said that she hated him with all her heart and was very glad that they were finally rid of him. The girl said that during all the adventures she learned. On what type of guys she likes, she added that she likes guys who have a strong sense of self-worth and are also reliable and strong. Guy seemed to understand something and looked strangely at the girl. Elle sharply shouted at the girl not to dare touch his boyfriend. Miss A sharply asked, "Since when are they a couple?" Guy laughed at the whole situation. Suddenly, his attention was drawn to a strange sign on the girl's neck. He turned to her and asked what it was. Miss A was surprised. Elle said that the guy also had such a sign on his neck. He was very surprised. They looked at the girl and, as it turned out, all the team members had it on their necks. Miss A looked at the mirror and asked what the hell that was. Elle replied that it looked like a magic symbol. Guy loudly replied that he didn't remember casting any spells. The girl said that now it's worth checking the statuses, maybe that way they can understand what's happening to them. The girl looked at the owl parchment and noticed that all her magical power had disappeared. Maria, in the form of paper money, quickly flew to the roof of one of the houses. They all flew into Rent's piggy bank, accumulating there. The guy noticed that the amount of magic in the storage had increased again, and the fairy was giggling nearby. Mappy said that she was completely sure that the hero's previous team was now in a state of shock from the whole situation. Rent began thinking that if they found out that all this was his doing, he was absolutely sure that they would look for him. The fairy sighed and asked if the guy was really that afraid of them. She added that if that was the case, then the guy should just beat them up. Rent couldn't believe his ears that he would beat someone up, and such a team too. He opened his eyes wide, looked at the fairy, and said that he definitely didn't have enough strength for this. The fairy took the piggy bank and flew up into the air with it, asking the boy if he had learned some new skills, hadn't he? Having given him the piggy bank, she suggested that he use the new powers he had acquired to the fullest extent, starting from that very moment. Rent looked straight into the eyes of his piggy bank, examining it as if he was seeing it for the first time in his life. Slowly, the full understanding of the situation came to him. He asked the fairy if this was the next condition for the evolution of the next gift. Mappy smiled mysteriously, hinting at something. The fairy began to remember that on that day, the soul of the master called to him. She screamed about the miserable days full of pain, prayed for the birth of a new adventurer in this world. She suffered because of a life in which he had to cling to others, but all this is in the past. From now on, he will follow his own path and create his own unique adventures. Mappy told Rent that he was really strong and that he should be more confident in himself. She smiled and added that if he had any problems, she would do everything to support her master. Tears began to accumulate in the guy's eyes. He was very grateful to the fairy for such kind words. He smiled brightly and thanked Mappy with all his heart. The girl asked what his plans were for the future. She clarified that along with managing the collection of magic, she hopes that they will be able to increase the level and so on. Rent was delighted and said that he knew a very good place. She said that on the outskirts of the city of Melba, there is an artificial one created by an ancient sorcerer. Rent said he trained there for some time after the squad was formed. Mappy asked where this city was. The guy replied that it was quite far from where they were now. Even if they went by high-speed carriage, the journey would take about 2 weeks. The fairy started some calculations. Everything was clear to her. She said that even if the scum started pursuing, it would give them a little time. Mappy suggested going to that city right now. Rent stood up abruptly and resolutely agreed. The fairy began to think that 3 weeks. The girl smiled cruelly and said that in 3 weeks they would have enough strength to fight the guy's former team. She, in turn, tried very hard to wash off the strange marks that had suddenly appeared on them. A huge carriage with a crowd of people was continuously moving forward somewhere. Rent sat on one of the chairs, closing his eyes and thinking about something of his own. While the guy was sitting, he used the magic operation skill. Rent turned to the fairy, saying that they would only spend 1,000 at first. He increased his maximum MP by 10 points. Suddenly, the system's voice announced that the condition was met. Now when using a magic operation, the restoration of magic power is doubled. The guy was surprised by this because now his strength grows by as much as 2 times, because usually the recovery is 10%. For him, it was very cool. The fairy winked and said that this was still far from the limit, but for now they would use all this very carefully. The guy in front of the carriage said that the cart to Melba was leaving very soon and that they should hurry. The Heavenly Sword team was in the sorcerer's shop. The man was looking closely at the sign on the girl's neck and trying to find something similar in his book, but nothing came of it. Everything was completely different. The old man asked himself several questions. Maybe this is part of ancient letters. He still can't understand what this sign is. Misei asks impatiently, does he still not understand what it is? The man replied that although he had been working in this business for over 80 years, he never thought that he would ever come across a sign unknown to him. Guy rudely came closer and loudly asked why he suddenly became so emotional, and demanded that the old man solve their problem as soon as possible. The man quickly began to apologize. He was ashamed. The team set out on an adventure. Guy swung her sword sharply, destroying the monster in front of her. Misei extended her hand, casting a fireball to clear the monster out of the way. Guy touched his cheek, realizing that he had been hit. The stripe from the wound was aching. The guy was surprised by this fact because usually the monsters did not even have time to touch him. This fact made him very angry. Yousei took out a potion saying that they were lucky. This spell is not unlimited. She added that they will cope if they drink the potion and replenish their magic reserves. In her hands was a magic restoration potion. It cost 10,000 gold. Guy asked how many of these bottles the girls had. She replied that there were about half 100 and showed the bag where all the bottles were. The guy was surprised by such a large amount of potion. Yousei replied that she paid 500,000 gold for them. Guy replied that they would have to be content with what they had now. Yousei replied that the bottles would run out someday and they needed to urgently remove the marks from their cabbage soup. This made the guy angry. For him, it was a real pain in the ass. Putting his hand to the wound again, he asked Elle to help him recover. The girl replied that she couldn't do that because she had no magic left. Guy got very angry. He brought his face close to her and shouted that all her words were nonsense and demanded that she drink the potion and restore her strength. The girl began to protest, saying that it was bitter. The guy ordered her to stop acting like a child and asked if she was completely useless without the magic potion. Elle couldn't take it anymore and started crying loudly. Yousei and Guy just silently watched this scene. The guy silently walked forward. His nerves were already at their limit. He was tired of all this. Yousei tried to stop the guy. He shouted at her to leave him alone and asked if it was his fault that Elle didn't want to restore her magical powers. Elle continued to cry loudly and screamed that she didn't want to drink the potion, but she really wanted her magic back. Yousei held the guy's hand, trying to stop him, and thought about something. Rent came to mind. Suddenly, the girl slowly began to realize she did not want to believe it. For her, it was completely impossible. The girl began to think that the one who cast the spell. Guy and Elle became interested, listening attentively to the girl. Yousei slowly called out Rent's name, saying that it was all his fault, while the guy himself sat calmly in the carriage, listening to the fairy. He looked at the girl and asked if she really loved admiring nature so much. The fairy replied that she simply adored doing it. She asked sharply what volcano was in the distance. Rent replied that it was Mount Grimo and also told about rumors that there might be a dragon's nest on the top of the mountain. Mappy's eyes sparkled with joy and childish interest. Rent smiled tenderly, touched by the fairy's behavior. He thought that Marie knew everything in the world, but as it turned out, this was not so. Today is the 6th day of the guy's journey. All this time, he has been consuming magic and increasing his maximum amount. Thanks to this, its current value is as much as 4709, which is comparable to the indicators of some great magician. Yes, magic operation is definitely a great skill. Allows him to freely move magical power in and out of the vault. He doesn't quite know how to use it right now, but according to Mappy, over time, everything will understand and realize the power of this skill. Now the guy can only sit. Now he is looking forward to his next improvements. Mappy looked out the window with childish excitement, examining all the nature around her. Suddenly, the system gave a voice, reporting that a total of 350,000 units had been spent on the magic operation. The system added that the condition had been met. Now the level of the magic operation had increased by 1. The purchase skill became available. This phrase shocked the guy. He did not immediately understand what it meant. The fairy flew closer and said that her master was able to do it. Rent didn't understand anything. He looked at the parchment and said that nothing new appeared on it. The fairy said that he just needed to wave it. The guy was surprised. Mappy pointed with her finger at exactly what the guy should do, urging him to do it. She also added that if you swipe your finger from the bottom up. Rent did just that, and as soon as he swiped up, a bunch of new information appeared on the parchment. The guy's eyes widened in shock. Everything he saw was really amazing. The fairy asked, "Isn't this a great selection?" Rent ran his eyes over the text, paying attention to the skills that appeared on his sheet. Mappy explained that they were all given to people by God, and usually they couldn't be obtained just like that. The guy wondered if it was really possible to buy them. The fairy smiled cruelly, realizing that he had guessed. The girl explained that this was all happening because it was a unique SSS rank skill. After finishing her monologue, Mappy asked what kind of adventurer the boy wanted to be. She added that she would always be ready to give advice on this matter and summed it up by saying that now the boy can get almost any skill. 2 weeks passed and the couple was able to reach the city of Melba. Rent stood in the middle of the street, looking around. The fairy pointed out that it was actually very busy here, and the guy replied that adventurers from all over the world come here to go through the great labyrinth of Melba. Mappy asked sharply. Rent was here when he first started his adventure, wasn't he? The guy answered that he was. They entered a small shop. The pretty girl asked if the guy was a member of any group, and asked if the guy was sure that he wanted to change his location from his previous city to Melba, to which she received a positive answer. The girl smiled and said that the registration was completed successfully. The guy had just received the right to challenge the Great Labyrinth and congratulated him on this event. Rent said it would give him a nice advantage. The fairy smiled cruelly and said that if these scum did come for them, they would not have to be afraid of them. The couple reached a huge labyrinth. They stood near the entrance to the Great Labyrinth of Melba. The fairy looked high up and said that here was the dungeon itself. She urged her master to go forward, to which the boy happily agreed. They walked forward slowly, beginning their new adventure. First level Great Plains, recommended adventure level F. Mappy looks ahead and asks how it happened that they ended up here. The guy replies that this is the Great Labyrinth of Melba. He made the assumption that this space was created by an ancient sorcerer. No one knows for sure. A sound from the grass caught their attention. Several Manitobai rats appeared in front of them, small but fierce and very fond of human flesh. Rent took out his weapon and turned his attention to the demons that appeared in front of him, for it happened just in time. The guy had a chance to try out his skills. The rats ran forward with quick steps, intending to attack and bite Rent. The guy remembers how Mappy talked about a skill that is very good for close combat, which really interested the guy. Rent took out a small dagger and told the fairy that it was needed for defense, but the guy almost never used it. Mappy replied that everything was wonderful and it was just time to try it out. Rent rushed forward and struck first, wounding the small rat. This is the art of the first level scammer. The cost of using it is 1,000 mister. The boy swung his dagger again, destroying another rat in his path. Finding strength in himself, he destroyed one rat after another. The fairy in the carriage talked about the next type of attack, long-range attacks. Rent made the assumption that he needed magic that he could use easily, quickly, and accurately. He offered the girl one option. The rat decided to right from behind, dangerously opening its mouth and trying to eat the guy alive, but he redirected his hand, preparing to strike. Rent sharply waved his hand and used fireball magic. This is a first-level fire magic. The cost of using it is 1,000 MP. Rent stood with his back straight and was breathing heavily after such an attack. His hand looked like he had slightly burned it. The fairy quickly appeared nearby and loudly admired the guy's abilities. She shouted that the guy was able to master magic very quickly. Rent himself had developed his abilities. Now he was faster, more agile, and also with magic. He said that all this was thanks to Mappy's recommendations. Next to them in the grass lay a not very large object, and it shone strangely in the sun. The fairy noticed that some jokes fell out of the rats. The guy explained that it was a magic stone. Rent continued by saying that when they kill demons in the dungeon, they turn into magic stones comparable to their power. Also, if you take one to the guild, it can be exchanged for money. The fairy's eyes lit up and she asked if it was true. She added that she suddenly became very motivated. Rent turned around, looking at a small group of people who, trying to fight off the rats, were shouting loudly and waving their wounded hands. The girl was screaming that she was running out of medicine for recovery. The guy was screaming for the girl to hurry up, because if they succeeded, they would get good money. Mappy giggled and called them just ordinary newbies. Rent replied that they were like that too. The guy remembers that before, he was always behind and gave magical power to the squad. The fairy smiled and looked closely at the rats. They noticed her and quickly headed in their direction, which the girl immediately informed the guy about. Rent, without a shadow of fear in his eyes, raised his dagger and destroyed the rats. Now, for him, everything will be completely different. His heart is beating like crazy. He had never felt anything like this before. The guy sits on a rock looking at his feet. He thrust his hand forward and suddenly used healing magic. First level recovery magic cost 1,000 MP to use. Mappy happily flew nearby and said that at this rate they would be able to reach the next level very soon, to which the guy agreed. He suddenly smiled brightly and told the fairy that he would very much like to stay here longer and test himself better. Mappy smiled widely in response and said that it was a very cool idea. Rent and Yousei sit sweetly in the cart and slowly drive somewhere. The guy suddenly turns to the girl and asks if she remembers his dream of adventure. Yousei smiled brightly and replied that of course she remembered. Suddenly, the girl put her hand on top of his and said that she always thought about the guy, to which he blushed. She added that when she became an adventurer, she decided she wanted to be with him. Miss A's face suddenly hardened, and in a rough tone of voice, she said that the guy was actually absolutely useless. Rent jumped out of bed abruptly. He was breathing heavily. The fairy lay nearby and quietly moped. He wondered, was it really a dream? The next day, the team headed to the next level. Melba's Great Labyrinth, Level 2, Great Goblin Sea, recommended Adventurer Level E. Rent carefully walked forward through the trees, realizing how thick the undergrowth was here. Putting his finger on his chin, he used the first level presence detection skill. The cost of using it was 5,000 MP. Rent says there are most likely goblins ahead, and his feeling is that it is a whole colony. The guy understands that fighting them one by one is not so difficult because they are weak, but most often they attack in a group, which is why it becomes a problem. The fairy flies nearby and laughs maliciously. She believes that it is time to put the guy's new skills to good use. The guy agreed, realizing that she was right, and it was time to become stronger. Rent uses the first level signal blocking skill. The cost of using it is 5,000 MP. With one blow, the guy destroyed one goblin and just as quickly took out the second one. A small goblin village where every dreamer found a job and did his own thing. I picked up Rent from the bushes nearby near the village. Slowly lifting the piggy bank, he used the skill to release magical energy. The goblins noticed the guy and looked at him for a while, waiting for further action, but suddenly they could not restrain themselves and opened their mouths to attack the guy. Paper money of magical energy slowly fell to the ground, simultaneously burning in the air before reaching the ground. Frowning, Rent put his hand forward and used his power to create several magical fireballs. The balls accurately hit every goblin in their path, destroying them. Clouds of smoke rose up, revealing what was going on inside the goblin village. Rent looked straight ahead, realizing that he could now cast spells consistently, and he liked it. The expenditure of magical power is actually a very big burden on the body. The fairy asked her master and asked if he could run for a very long time, to which the guy answered negatively, saying that he could not stand it. Mappy explained that it also works with magic. It is impossible to use magic continuously. The fairy added that if you use the release of magical energy, you can wrap the magical power around your body and release it later. Mappy explained that you can use the same spell in a row, but now you can release several at once. Rent walked forward slowly, looking around, trying to figure out if he had succeeded. Suddenly, a huge figure of a goblin appeared in front of the guy. It was the goblin chieftain, the leader of the colony. Rent fired several more fire projectiles, which exploded as they reached the goblin's body. He burned, leaving behind only ashes. The fairy began to scream loudly that everything worked out, while the guy laughed nervously. The girl shouted that he was able to conquer an entire colony of goblins single-handedly. Rent smiled and replied that he was not alone, saying that the fairy was nearby. Mappy laughed awkwardly and said that it was very sweet of him. The fairy became determined and raised her fist in the air, saying that they needed to continue in the same spirit. The couple entered the guild. A pretty girl stood next to the scales and said that now they would weigh the stones that were left behind by the goblins. There were 1341 of them in total. She added that this was 134,100 gold. The girl continued, for the leader of the goblins, the guy will receive 10,500 gold. Other materials that the guy was able to collect during the adventure, it will be 42,000 gold. The girl was preparing to name the entire amount that the guy will receive. In the end, it came out to 186,600 gold. The girl put a huge bag in front of the guy. This shocked the guy greatly, and the fairy's eyes lit up from such a large amount. Night fell on the city. A guy and his companion were relaxing in a small hotel. The fairy ate her fried squid very actively. She was very happy with her hearty lunch. Rent shared that thanks to their combined efforts, the boy's adventurer rank had risen from E to D, and he understood that if he continued to use the skills he had acquired, he could become even stronger. Clenching his fist, the boy realizes that at this rate he will be able to stand up for himself and fight back against Guy, and such thoughts give him the determination to train. The fairy smiled proudly and replied that since the guy had transferred to another city, now the former team would not find him anytime soon. It was only a matter of time before they found out about the contract and would run to look for them. Mappy said they needed to accumulate another 150,000 units. She added that in this case they will be able to buy new skills and then they will not have to be afraid. Rent was upset, saying that 150,000 units was a lot and they would have to go a long way to such a high amount. The fairy replied that they would definitely cope and there was nothing to worry about. She folded her hands in a prayerful gesture and thanked the boy for the food. Rent asked if the girl wanted anything else. The fairy asked if there was anything else tasty. The guy smiled and replied that the girl could eat as much as she wanted. He wanted to thank her for everything she had done for him. Mappy smiled and said that this time, she needed his magical power. The guy was surprised and asked again, to which he quickly received the correct answer. The fairy replied that for her, magical power is the best delicacy. For her, it is pure nectar. Rent was surprised again and said that she should have told him about her abilities earlier, to which the fairy was indignant and said that becoming a master was much more important. The guy asked how much she wanted. Mappy smiled and was surprised that he agreed and asked for 100. Rent took the piggy bank in his hands and asked how to do it correctly and suggested that through some special skill. The fairy pursed her lips strangely, which surprised the guy. The girl said that direct contact was needed. Rent did not immediately understand, but the fairy added that this was the best and fastest way. The guy only had to agree and pout in response. Placing Mappy on his palm, he gently touched her lips. Breaking the kiss, the fairy blissfully fell into the guy's arms. She looked full and happy. Rent asked how the fairy was feeling. Marie looked very happy and replied that everything was fine with her. The guy thought about it and realized that this was his very first kiss. Again, a cart with several people sitting inside. Young Miss A smiles and says that Rent's mom has the best and most special skill. She added that she always knew the boy was destined for a life of adventure, and Rent smiled and said that Guy had told him the same thing. The guy himself was sleeping behind them on the hay. The girl clarified that he had received the swordsman's skill. She called this skill ordinary and added that D-rank heats were not that rare. Miss A smiled and asked Ren if they could travel together now. The guy smiled and answered positively, adding the thought that they simply had to create a lot of new stories. The girl blushed sharply and looked at Rent with different eyes. She said that all this was very good and asked if they could be together in another way. Rent blushed deeply, surprised by such a proposal from the girl. It surprised him so much that for a couple of seconds he lost the power of speech and could not immediately squeeze out even a word. He only managed to squeeze out the girl's name. Making cute eyes, the girl asked if the guy loved her, to which he responded with an uncertain and very shy yes. His eyes darted around and his cheeks turned even redder. Miss A wanted to make the first move. Taking a breath, she pouted her lips and began to bring her face as close as possible. It was slow, but after a couple of seconds, her lips were dangerously close to Rent's lips. Suddenly, instead of warm lips, the guy felt something cold. Opening his eyes, he realized that instead of a warm kiss from a girl, he received a kiss from an apple. Rent was clearly very unhappy with this, which he immediately told her in the form of a frightened cry. Miss A laughed and began to apologize to the guy for such a stupid joke. The girl smiled tenderly, apologized again, and explained that she was not ready for any serious relationship yet. For her, this idea was stupid, so she wanted to joke. Rent awkwardly scratched the back of his head, saying that now he understood everything for sure. His smile was awkward because they had made a stupid joke about him, but he didn't hold a grudge. He didn't see the point in it. Suddenly, from behind, Guy's cries were heard. He was unhappy with the noise outside. Rent turned his attention to him. He was slightly surprised that he woke up abruptly, and Miss A said that they could sleep a little more because the city was far away. Rent remembered all this with a heavy pain in his heart. They were very close people, but he was betrayed and exchanged for some bracelets. He is ready to take revenge to the end. Anger, despair, a sense of loss, these were the feelings that consumed the guy, making him think about his revenge and adding determination to get all his strength back with interest. If he hadn't met Mappy, how could his life have turned out? He could have stayed on the street in that very rain and literally become the trash of society, unwanted and abandoned. He adjusted the blanket over her small body so that she would be warm all night. Looking at the fairy, he experienced a strange feeling, not like love or deep affection. He himself did not fully understand what exactly he felt for this little cruel girl. But just looking at her, his soul becomes warm and calm. He feels alive again. Her presence calmed him and warmed his soul, making it clear that he is not alone. He realizes that he feels happy. Taking his blanket, he quietly covers himself and also quietly says goodnight to the sleeping fairy next to him, while the stars light up brightly over the city. Adventurers Guild. The girl behind the counter smiles a mechanical smile and says that, as he said earlier, Mr. Rent is somewhere in this city. Guy shouts that this can't be because they had already been looking for the guy for several days. The girl replied that she was sorry to hear this. The guy started swearing at her again, asking who she thought he was. Misei came closer and said, "Guy calmed down, now they definitely don't need any extra conflicts." Sitting somewhere in her house, Misei tried to understand how much of their strength was being spent. On the parchment it was written that the borrowed magic of the squad was 2,678,078. The girl says that she knew it. The girl emphasizes that compared to yesterday, the amount of magic has decreased. Guy cursed at the guy, realizing that he continues to steal their magic. Misei looks at the parchment and realizes that she hadn't noticed all of this until now. She hadn't kept track of the amount of magic power they used, but she still finds it all strange. She explained that their squad, bracelets, and overall magic power from natural recovery. The girl concluded that reducing the amount of borrowed magic is too little. Guy stood up and asked what she meant. Misei replied that she herself did not fully understand the whole situation. Elle asked how much longer they would have to rely on these potions. She found them very bitter and they were not cheap. Misei stood up from her chair and replied that they would have to be patient for now. She calculated that if each of them drank 45 bottles to replenish their strength, then the loss of magic would be 0. Elle began to loudly complain, saying that she didn't want to drink it anymore and asked him to drink it all instead of her. Guy got angry and asked what kind of nonsense she was talking about. Misei, on the contrary, became interested in the girl's phrase. Adventurers Guild. The middle-aged man that the Heavenly Sword team had once addressed sat and smoked quietly. While he was quietly spending his time alone, Misei called out to him sharply. The girls showed up in very revealing outfits and asked their grandfather if he remembered them. The man assumed that they were from that squad. Misei was glad that he remembered them. The girls suddenly stood on either side of him and added in a gentle voice that they really needed his help, that they needed him. Grandpa was surprised by such pressure from the girls. It shocked him. He could not have expected that such girls would first drive him away from their team, and then come back and ask for something. At the next table behind the whole picture, Guy was sitting. His expression on his face betrayed all his displeasure. He remembered how Misei had built the whole plan. According to her idea, Maria, who took away magic, stole only a certain amount. She rarely got up from the table and said that they should increase the overall amount of magic for the entire team. They just need to find a recruit with a high magic stat. Guy was pleased with this plan. He believed that it would reduce the influence on the others. Elle called the girl a genius. Showing the parchment of the old man they had visited not long ago, they realized that they needed him. Now he was their target, which they were able to find quite quickly. In a playful voice, Misei begged him for an answer. She pressed herself as close as possible, hoping that her plan would work. She wanted to believe in it and did everything she could for it. The old man himself looked with red cheeks, trying to raise his gaze. Suddenly, a small group of adventurers approached from behind, turning to the old man, who was glad that the team had finally appeared. The guy asked who the girls were next to which the old man replied that they were nobody and just wanted to ask something. Misei asked sharply if he was no longer free. The man replied that it was not quite so. The old man shared that the entire guild already knew that the Heavenly Sword team was under a strange curse. His voice sounded mocking, showing with his appearance what level the team was now at. He apologized and said that he definitely wasn't going to get involved with people like that. For him, it was the same as taking their curse upon himself, but he definitely didn't need it. No one needs rumors. Misei began to loudly complain. Elle tried to calm her down. Guy clenched his teeth in anger. They were humiliated more than they had ever been humiliated. They couldn't believe their ears. They wanted to break something. The guy's attention was drawn to the conversation behind him. The girl who was not accepted into this team mockingly said to look at this because they themselves did not accept her, and now they are begging. She concluded that the team should not have acted so arrogantly. The man next to them suggested that they must have really pissed someone off and were now cursed. The girl sighed and said that she liked them initially, but the man replied that their time had already passed. They both didn't care about the fate of the team because it was their own fault. Guy came dangerously close from behind and asked rudely if he was talking about them. Anger was boiling in his blood. In every movement, in every word, he was ready to shut them up with a blow to the table. Grabbing the man by his clothes, he cursed and started shouting loudly. Why did he stop talking nonsense? And asked sharply, is it their time that's gone? Elle tried to stop him too. Suddenly, the administrator addressed the Boundless Sky Sword Squad. The girl said that she had processed their question and now she knew the location of Mr. Rent. Misei and Guy suddenly ran towards her, rudely asking where he was. The girl replied that Mr. Rent was stationed in Melba. The girl was very surprised that the guy went to the city of the Great Labyrinth. Misei wonders how he got so far away. Guy just dropped his jaw and said he didn't care. He wanted to find him and destroy him with his own hands. His eyes were seething with anger and a desire to destroy everything he met on his way, and he dreamed of the guy catching his eye. Guy emerged from the bushes after his journey. The fairy shouted sharply that they had managed to find the entrance to the 3rd level. Rent says that further on the monsters become much stronger and more dangerous, so he will have to sweat much more than usual. Level 3 Wraith Cave, recommended adventure rank D. Marie shared that she felt the presence of a trap here because the room dimly lit its passages. The girl suddenly perked up. She liked the gloomy air here. Finally, she felt something similar to a classic dungeon. Rent was embarrassed by such behavior. But suddenly he supported her idea and also began to enjoy this view of the dungeon. He shared that even his heart began to beat faster. The fairy said that she felt the same. Having managed to dodge the attack at the last moment, the protagonist uses the dagger for a quick attack and hits the skeleton's core right away. It was sudden, but the enemy was defeated. Rent assumed that the monsters that appeared on this level of the dungeon attacked based on sound. Then the fairy suggested an idea. They could talk mentally. The boy was terribly surprised by the voice in his head. Mappy calmed him down and explained that he could do that too. He tried to address her and the fairy replied that she could hear him. Then the guardian remarked with offense that she should have told him about such an ability during the trip. Mappy only laughed and apologized for this. As the team progressed further and further on the floor, the fairy rejoiced because the level was much cooler than the previous ones. The caves are quite confusing, so the guy needs to be careful not to be attacked from blind spots. For this, Rent used the spell Detect Presence. While looking at the results, he saw adventurers nearby fighting a monster, so he decided to study the monster better. In a short moment, the main character ran, which caused confusion in his companion, who immediately wanted to know what happened. Rent assumed that they were irregulars. The fairy didn't understand, so the guy explained. They were strong enemies that didn't fit into the dungeon's difficulty level. In rare cases, demons from deeper floors would appear on the upper floors. That was the monster the boy was heading for. Mappy guessed that her master wanted to join in and help the poor guys. He only apologized for his soft-heartedness. But the magical planner wasn't worried. She sensed the benefit of this situation. Rent ran into some strangers from around the corner, to which the warrior shouted out, "What is he running around here for?" The guy started apologizing. Watching the squabble, the magician hurried his friend and the healer supported him in this. The girl was indignant that they were running away like that, but the warrior was sure that it was better this way than to die. The magician could only add that they would have luck elsewhere. Watching the strangers go, the fairy asked Rent if these were the adventurers who had been attacked. The keeper was sure that these were not the same ones, but they had also spotted an irregular. He was more worried that someone had obviously stayed behind. Mappy guessed that someone had failed to escape. Then the guy hurried on, but there was a dead end further on. But after a closer inspection, it became clear that the wall was made of a material different from the surrounding walls. It was made of magic. When he touched it, the guy felt that it was warm, which meant that it had been created recently. This obstacle was created by a team of adventurers that the protagonist accidentally stumbled upon. Rent realized this and asked his companion to move away, after which he used a fireball and destroyed the wall. After the dust settled, a monster, or rather a four-armed skeleton, appeared before the main character. But before the guy could come to his senses, the fairy pointed him to the exhausted warrior. The girl was not going to give up and screamed with all her might, calling on the monster to attack. While the girl was fighting another monster, the man insistently recommended moving faster. She listened to him and apologized for her mistake. The mage used healing magic on the guy. He jokingly noted that it took a long time, to which the mage just waved it off. The team was planning to break through to the 3rd level today. The mage didn't mind because he had enough magic for now, as long as they didn't run into a whole horde of creatures. The girl, having gathered her strength, asked to be treated as well, but her companions were not going to waste magic on a scratch. The other girl didn't see much value in Rinka and only coldly encouraged the girl. The warrior apologized dejectedly. The team blamed Rinka for the fact that they were still in rank D only because of her and asked her not to interfere in the battles. The girl apologized again. But her apologies only angered her companion because instead of apologies you can try harder. Suddenly, something scared the guys. The mage didn't know what kind of monster was in front of him and he doubtfully assumed that it was the boss on the 3rd level, but his friend quickly guessed that it was an irregular. The man called out to the girl, but she was not going to back down because she did not want to let her team down this time. He agreed with her in a strange way and added that she should be really useful for the last time. Rinka decided to ask the man again, as she did not understand what he meant. While fighting the monster, the girl did not immediately notice that her team was retreating. At the moment when the wall was created, the man hurried his friends as it was time to leave. Only managing to block the enemy's attacks, Rinka couldn't believe that they decided to wall her up along with the boss. Pushing aside the thought that she had been abandoned, the girl convinced herself that she was simply buying them time, in which case her team would be able to escape safely. Remembering that she was considered by her team to be the weak link that prevented them from becoming stronger, Rinka was going to fight to the end. The warrior was ready to attack, but her sword could not withstand such attacks. Her consciousness refused to accept the death that was already close. At the very last moment, an explosion thundered, knocking the skeleton off his feet. The fairy began to tease the monster and wanted to know if he liked the fireball. Without thinking twice, the guy asked if the girl was okay and offered to treat her. But Rinka noticed some movement and abruptly informed the rescuer that the skeleton was still alive. The main character understood that the skeleton was not so simple, so he had only one option left. Rent used a fireball to stun the enemy, then noticed the core. He decided to use his dagger to attack, but did not have time to cast a spell. Mappy was worried about the master, but he assured her that everything was relatively fine. The monster rushed towards Rent with a roar, but the boy found the enemy's weak spot and was going to finish him off with one blow. The protagonist used the spell Magic Operation and was ready to destroy the enemy. Rent used a fireball on the monster at 20 times its size. The 4-armed skeleton could not withstand the main character's attack and finally lost. The people at the market were discussing the arrival of the A-rank squad meteor shower in Melba and deciding whether to go or not. At this time, Roger, a member of the meteor shower squad, was signing autographs. A man came up to him and asked him to sign his shirt, which surprised the adventurer. But the fan was going to make the shirt his talisman for his travels, and the man agreed. At that moment, Roger was called out. Comet, a member of the meteor shower squad, threatened that if the man did not eat his rice, she would take it away. The adventurer asked him to wait and assured him that he would finish soon, but the girl was not going to wait for it to dry. Namiria, a member of the meteor shower squad, coquettishly remarked that Roger was as popular as ever. At this time, Jin, a member of the meteor shower squad, was telling them that their team was going to conquer the Great Labyrinth and asked if the Lord would smile upon them. The men supported Jin, and someone even bet on their success. But the adventurer protested because this was not a bet for money. In parallel to the noisy conversations, Fuga, a member of the meteor shower squad, sat and drank his tea in silence. Suddenly, a team ran out of the labyrinth, reporting trouble. An irregular appeared in the Great Labyrinth on the 3rd floor. The man described it as a skeleton with 2 pairs of arms. Roger immediately realized that he was talking about a 4-armed skeleton. A worried girl ran up to the adventurers, asking if everyone was safe and where they met him. She promised that a strike team would be sent there immediately. The trio assured that she was safe, but not their friend. The man said that Rinka decided to distract him and gave them a chance to escape. The girl couldn't believe what she heard. Afterwards, she tried to clarify whether their companion had died, but the man, realizing what she was trying to ask, dejectedly confirmed that most likely she was no longer alive. The girl, hearing his doubts, turned sharply to her colleague and asked her to check the labyrinth for signs of life. The colleague immediately began searching, asking for the name of the victim. The girl's companions remembered her sadly because Rinka did not wish harm to anyone. At that moment, the man received a report. People were delighted with the good news. The girl was still alive. Someone suggested going after her immediately. The team was not happy with this news and clearly did not expect her to be alive because they locked their companion in. The girl noticed the team's strange whispering, but Roger confidently interrupted any conversations. The meteor shower squad is going to destroy the irregular and save Rinka. The girl turned to the group with doubts. Roger explained that they had not been in the labyrinth for a long time. They could take a short trip to get used to it. Comet was going to have fun. People started talking among themselves because such a promising team is participating. It gives everyone hope. Suddenly someone shouted out that there is no need for help. Rent had dealt with the monster and was now leaving the labyrinth with the girl completely unharmed. Seeing Rinka, her team screamed her name in fear. The protagonist killed the irregular, leaving only a large magic stone. Then Roger came up and asked in amazement if it was really Rent. The guardian happily greeted an acquaintance he hadn't seen for a long time. The man was interested in the identity of the girl next to Rent. Rinka herself answered him that the guy had helped her escape. The people around him started chanting, noting that the guy was cool. Then the man hysterically asked the keeper if he was the one who had passed them. Jin stopped him and suggested that he thank Rent for saving his friend. But the main character answered seriously that there was no need for that because they used Rinka as bait. The man asked him again in shock. Namaria asked suspiciously about the bait, and the girl incredulously reminded that according to her team, she stayed voluntarily. The warrior pretended to scream that everything was as he had said then and the keeper's accusations were a lie. Rent asked the girl to look at a piece of wall created by magic. These three conjured the wall and cut off Rinka's exit. If you check the stone, you can find out the person who created the wall. People started to condemn such an act, and in desperation, the man turned to the girl to confirm that her team was not lying and this guy made it all up. Adventurers are fickle. There is no guarantee that they will be alive tomorrow, so they completely trust those they take into their party. But this trio knows only betrayal and abandonment. Roger thought that this team had no right to exist, but then someone tapped him on the shoulder. After a silent dialogue with Fugue, the adventurer calmed down. The worker wanted to know if they had any excuse. Roger decided not to get involved in it any further and suggested that they go hunting for a change. Jean supported the idea. Then the man asked Rent if the keeper was free the day after tomorrow evening. The protagonist did not understand him, but Roger had already said goodbye to him, getting ready to leave. Namiria said goodbye until the next meeting. Jin praised him for his excellent work, and Comet brazenly pushed him out of the way, thinking that the keeper was standing in the passage. Fuga silently apologized for the girl's behavior, but the guy was not offended. Looking at them, Mappy stated that they were a noisy company. Rent, laughing, did not argue with her. After all, this was the Meteor Shower Squad. The girl called Rinka and Rent to answer questions about the situation. After the entire procedure, the worker thanked them for their cooperation. The crystal had been shining blue all this time, meaning their testimony was true. The girl wanted to know what had happened to her former squad. They were being interrogated in a separate room at the time. For such behavior and for falsely reporting to the guild, they faced serious prison terms. Also, a lifetime exclusion from adventurers. They will be forced to work in the mines for a long time. Rinka tried to make sense of it all, but simply said that she understood. The girl thanked Rent again for his help. The guy wondered what she would do now, but she had no plans because the team had disbanded on its own. The keeper decided to cheer her up and pointed to the huge bag of money they had earned by destroying that skeleton. Rent added that it was all thanks to her, and for that he wanted to at least treat her. The girl shyly tried to refuse. The guy admitted that his partners had abandoned him too. Rinka was surprised, then the keeper added that since they were here, he could listen to her complaints. After they sat down in the tavern, the girl told him that she had been dumped for the 7th time. The main character found it hard to believe such a large number. She decided to honestly admit that her heart was breaking not from rejections, but from something completely different. Rinka received the gift, the Path of Usura, which did not help her leave the battlefield. The guy was more surprised by the rarity of the gift because it was unique. The girl flatly stated that these were just words. She considered herself weak because she could not cope with her own sword, but the gift still made her fight. Her destiny is to fight until the death, but the boy also suffered with his gift. His former partners left when Rent became useless to them. The guardian hated himself for his weakness. But the gift could also save him. It is called Infinite Magic Storage. It is the same unique skill as Rinka's. The girl thought about his words. She wondered if she could one day become as confident. Rent suggested that Rinka form a team. She was surprised by his suggestion, and he added that his gift is to support others, which means they will work well together. The girl remembered all the mockery and especially clearly the words of her last command, after which she apologized for refusing. Working with her would only slow down the keeper, it would be better for her to work alone. Seeing an unprecedented creature in front of her, the girl became frightened and screamed that there were relics. Mappy greeted Rinka and introduced herself, explaining that she was helping Mr. Rent while the boy recovered from the shock of the sudden scream. The girl was still surprised that she saw a fairy. Mappy apologized for scaring the girl. Initially, she was only visible to the Guardian of Magic, but thanks to his development of abilities, she can now show herself to anyone she wishes. Rink had nothing to worry about. Rent would never judge her because the girl was a great investment. Rinka was scared, not understanding what Mappy's words meant. The main character indignantly wanted to know what his friend was talking about, but she calmly stated that it was a compliment. Then Rent thought about it. If Rinka works with the guy, she will become stronger. If so, then Rent will grow too. Mutual benefit is the very essence of the gift of the Keeper of Magic. The girl hesitantly asked if she really would become stronger. He answered with a confident yes. Seeing that Rinka still didn't believe him, the Keeper suggested trying this scheme for just one day. Remembering everything Rent had done before, the girl decided to believe him. After all, he had saved her then. At least she would try her best. Afterwards, they went to the guild together and approached the administrator. The company registered its unit, calling it Double Deviation. The seller gave 20 restorative potions after payment, after which he turned to Yousei, reluctantly warning. The effect of this potion is that it lends magic forward, so to speak. If you use it too often, then problems will start one day. The magician was unhappy that the seller was lecturing her, saying that he didn't use it often. She chuckled and walked away proudly, while the man wearily realized that this happened every time. The express wagon to Melba was about to leave. The men in it recognized the party at the very end as the two-headed silver wolf. Knowing that a B-rank squad was traveling with them, the people were confident in their safety. At that moment, another team approached them and Guy insistently asked them to switch places with Distra and Sinistra, members of the two-headed silver wolf squad. Elle envied the soft place they had settled on. Yousei complained about the bad places they had gotten. The swordsman even demanded to change. The siblings recognized them as the Boundless Sky Sword Squad, which was considered to be the fastest-growing B rank in history. Guy also identified who was sitting in front of him by saying that they were always dragging themselves along at the end of the B rank. Roly, a member of the two-headed silver wolf, no longer wanted to listen to the swordsman's ridicule. But that didn't stop Guy. Then Distra and Sinistra themselves offered to swap, although the girls from their team clearly did not understand their motives. They gave way to the wonderful squad, and even after that they heard ridicule directed at them. Sarika, a member of the two-headed silver wolf squad, did not particularly like these three, and she was not sure that the leader's decision was correct. This is an express carriage. It can get you to your destination twice as fast as a high-speed coach. That's because it travels along dangerous paths that regular carriages can't. The person sitting at the end of such a carriage, according to an unspoken rule, is the guardian of the entire journey. Their team chose such a responsible role for themselves and did not even realize it. Sarika was outraged by the carelessness of this trio, but Sinistra assured the girl that a rank B squad could not be so irresponsible. Shannon, a member of the two-headed silver wolf, thought about it and realized that she had some dislike for them. At this time, the cart was rushing through the eerie forest, which was so tense for the guards monitoring the safety on the road. Suddenly, a voice was heard warning the people in the cart that there were orcs ahead. The monsters had already dealt with the convoy. One of the soldiers shouted to the adventurers that there were 3 orcs, so they needed reinforcements as soon as possible. The wolves had a job to do. Roly was rather rudely awakened by another squad, and Guy, in turn, did not understand what was wanted from them. But the brother and sister hinted that it was time for the guardians of the entire journey to show themselves in all their glory. The opponents in this battle were the high orcs. The B-rank units should easily defeat such enemies. The right monster went to the two-headed wolf, the left to the sword of the Boundless Sky, and the middle one to the convoy. There was a deep forest around the adventurers, so they needed to finish off the enemies quickly so that no other monsters would appear. Distra and his team were going to deal with this quickly as usual. Sarika used acceleration magic on her allies, after which Roly attacked the orc head-on to distract his attention. The twins used their swords to cast the Chains of Humility spell, after which Shannon sent a fire tornado at the enemy. The wolves completed their task in 7 seconds. This is a good result, although not a record. During this time, the soldiers tried to harm the orc, but this only angered the monster. Seeing the convoy's futile attempts to defeat them, Distra and Sinistra used a paired attack called Silver Scissors and defeated the enemy. The soldiers thanked their rescuers, but Roly was dissatisfied with something. Guy demanded that Elle use her amplification magic, but she couldn't use the spell because she hadn't drunk the potion. Misei felt sick after the first bottle. The swordsman scolded his companions for their lack of usefulness, while the audience did not understand what this team was doing. The orc was already approaching, and the girls wanted Guy to sort everything out, but the guy suspected that the potion would not have time to work. The warrior did not finish the potion because he convinced himself that no one would take away his skills, but it turned out that the orc was stronger. Misei began to doubt what was happening because in their time they had killed such orcs in droves. Guy refused to listen to her lamentations. He only wanted to be able to use his power to the fullest. The swordsman needed his magical power, and while he was lost in his thoughts, the twins dealt with the last enemy. The battle was finally over, which meant the way was clear. People applauded the heroes right from the carriage. The siblings apologized to Guy's crew for interfering. They were protecting the carriage and simply doing their duty. The swordsman saw no need for it, as he believed they could handle it themselves. The twins were running out of patience, so they sarcastically stated that they were willing to believe the warrior's words. As they left, they both said that reputation was a fragile thing. Guy asked them again with a challenge, but suddenly fell silent because of his wound. Noticing the blood, Sinistra asked Sarika to heal them. The girl did not want to waste her magic supply, but she still agreed. The soldiers had a strong doubt that the sword of the illiterate Sky was in the leaders of the B-rank squads. Roly realized that the rumors about them were true. It is known that some spell has deprived them of the ability to use skills, but if they boast so much about their rank, they should be able to fight without them. Sarika rudely urged the team on, because they needed to get out of this place before more monsters arrived. People were chatting animatedly among themselves, discussing the trio of adventurers along the way. Guy was sure that if it weren't for the mark, they would have won. Misei blamed the protagonist for everything. The swordsman remembered Rent with even greater anger and contempt. Registration of the new squad Double Deviation in Melba is complete. Squad level F members Rent and Rinka. The system window showed the protagonist that he had joined the second squad. The requirements for skill growth were met. Lending magic increased to level 2. Rent has acquired the skill Auto Compensation. When the debtor's magic falls below a certain level, this skill automatically grants the person magical power. The Guardian no longer needs to check the magical power of his companions during combat. Rinka thanks the guy for the repair fluid he lent her. She smears it on her armor and everything looks like new. Rent is glad he could help, but that's not all. The girl couldn't believe her eyes and asked Rent. He explained that she had broken her sword in the last battle, so the guy brought the skeleton's weapon and melted it down, after which the blacksmith forged her a weapon. Everything was paid for, so the swordswoman only had to take it for herself. The girl's aura changed beyond recognition, and the blacksmith felt it himself. Rent asked the girl what she thought about the sword. Rinka was delighted because now she can cut anything. The swordswoman thanked her companion. At that moment, the man did not understand whether he imagined it or not. For a moment, the blacksmith seemed to her to be the most terrible swordsman in the world. The team returned to Melba's Great Labyrinth, only this time to the second level. The girl decided to explain her abilities to the keeper once again. The most useful skill is self-enhancement, that is, using magical power to strengthen yourself. Once the skill is activated, all magic is consumed until the enemy in front of you is defeated. 7 units upon activation. After that, 1 is consumed every 10 seconds. The maximum supply of the swordswoman is 10. Now she can use the ability for 40 seconds. Mappy clarified that on the other hand, if the party member's magic didn't run out, her skill wouldn't be interrupted. Rent was sure it was possible thanks to his magic borrowing skill and his newly acquired auto compensation. Rinka wasn't sure it was possible. The goblin blew his horn, noticing the strangers. Rent tries to lend the girl some magic and asks her to trust him. From the first blow to the last, Rinka's sword will cut and destroy. This is the way of Asura. The main character activated the skill Auto-Compensation. Magic is less than 9 units, the skill Magic on Loan. The girl began to defeat enemies at breakneck speed. Watching Rinka's trial battle, the Guardian of Magic could not even imagine what her true power was. The swordswoman dodged the arrows and, running up the tree, struck down the attackers. Her gift is a serious thing, the power is simply off the charts. The only drawback is the high consumption of magic. It is not surprising that an ordinary squad could not reveal her potential. However, her ability of only 1 unit of magic per 10 seconds is a dream. Presumably, in the future, her skill will improve and more magic will be required. Most likely, it's not just about skills and improvements, but about her herself. Rinka dealt with the large goblin with lightning speed with just 1 blow of her sword. Rent was shocked by the girl's cool skills because she was able to kill all the goblins in a couple of minutes. In an unconscious state, the swordswoman attacked the main character, but consciousness began to come to her and Rinka recognized the guy. Because the girl had never used the skill for so long, she fell down exhausted and asked Rent for forgiveness for it. The boy awkwardly noticed that the swordswoman was too close. Suddenly realizing this, she moved away from him and began to apologize for it. Mappy, watching from the side, made fun of her companions. The guild calculated the value of the materials that Rent's squad had collected. 1,043 goblin magic stones amounted to 104,300 gold. 18 goblin chieftain magic stones are 9,000 gold. Goblin seeds obtained from destroying a colony, 18 pieces, are 36,000 gold. The guild gave out the reward, and at that moment Rinka excitedly called out to the keeper, because just today her maximum amount of magic had increased by 4 units. The main character congratulated her, and the girl admitted that over the past 3 years she had only managed to get 2 units. Therefore, the swordswoman was very grateful to Rent. The guy only helped her, but she did the main work herself. Rinka admitted that she still can't believe what happened. But the Keeper of Magic saw everything, and he thinks it was just magnificent. The girl with the fight was simply incomparable. She should be proud of it. Hearing his words, she was touched. At this point, the fairy interrupted them. Mappy wanted to inform them about today's loan for Mrs. Rinka. Since the skill is activated once, a total of 126 units. The activation time is 1 hour and 21 minutes. 1 unit is consumed every 40 seconds, so it came out to 490. Having calculated everything completely, the fairy ended up with 616 units. The swordswoman agreed with her. Rinka promised to become stronger and pay back the debt, after which the fairy began a conversation with her about the interest rate. Looking at them, Rent wondered when was the last time he had been thanked for his help. Then the keeper remembered how much his former comrades had valued him in the very beginning. The protagonist was not going to make the same mistakes of the past again. This time they would be strong together. The girls distracted the guy from his thoughts by offering to celebrate the creation of the squad, offering a delicious meal. The adventurers defeated the dragon in Melba's Great Labyrinth on the 8th floor of Dragon Mountain. Jin was upset that the scales were very strong and therefore difficult to remove. Then Fuga said that the request stated that 30 pieces were needed. The warrior did not know that collecting scales was more difficult than killing the dragon itself. Then he turned his attention to the girls, who should also help, but Nymeria was not going to do the hard work and Comet refused to be a laborer. Roger emerged from the dragon and obtained the dragon's liver for Jin. The warrior began to scold Roger for his carelessness, after which the man began to apologize while strange worms appeared behind him. It was a parasite inside the dragon that had captured Nymeria and Comet. The girls wanted, or rather demanded, to be freed. At this time, Fugue continued to collect scales as if nothing had happened. The main character invited the girl to dinner with a meteor shower. She flatly refused because she was a low-ranking adventurer. Then Rinka wanted to know how he knew them. It turned out that since Rent's previous squad had started to attract attention, they had been drinking with them several times. The swordswoman hoped that the guy would have a good evening. Arriving at the bar, Rent remembered that he hadn't had a drink with Roger for a long time, and although he was really looking forward to it, he was still nervous. Suddenly, the girl apologized to the keeper for being late. Rent was surprised that Nymeria was wearing a dress, even though her team was on a mission that day. The mage explained that meeting him was a good enough reason to dress up. She wanted to know his opinion on the outfit. Rent sheepishly called it beautiful. Nymeria received a slap on the back of the head from Roger for hugging the guardian. The warrior also wanted to know what this ugly outfit was and when the girl had managed to change. She only replied that it hurt and that Roger simply did not understand beauty because Rent liked the outfit. After they sat down, the warrior said that he had heard many rumors about the boys' squad and then asked the keeper directly about his exclusion. Roger sympathized with Rent and to cheer him up, offered him a drink to forget about everything bad. The protagonist apologized because now is not the right time for drinking. Nymeria thought this story was terrible. How could you kick out a friend like that after 5 years? Roger only added that lately all you hear about is their failures. Apparently everything was held together only by Renta. The guy has the ability to store magic. Apparently his former squad forgot that they had high hopes for him. This team reached the B rank the fastest. For this reason, Roger considered them all narcissists. Now that Rent thinks about it, it seems like he was the one clinging to them. In their adventures, the keeper was content with giving them his magic, and the boy himself did not think about creating his own path. The main character deserved to be expelled because he was truly short-sighted back then. Roger suddenly realized that Rent had become an adult, which surprised the guy. In the girl's opinion, her leader was more of a child than the keeper. The man was clearly hurt by this comment. Nymeria told Rent about the battle with the dragon. They only appear on the 8th level of the Great Labyrinth where the meteorite shower was going on, and in Roger's opinion, these lizards sometimes cause problems. Afterwards, the girl decided to tell the main character about the story with the dragon parasites. Although the man tried to stop her, he ultimately failed. Rent knows that Roger and Nymeria are the kind of guys whose greatness he will never achieve, but even so, they talk about their adventures as if they were all equal friends. The main character wants to become an adventurer like the meteorite shower. Roger said that his team was going to go through the entire 8th level. As soon as he said this, the keeper immediately guessed what it meant and the man confirmed it. The squad set out to conquer the Great Labyrinth of Melba and pass the deepest level. The deepest level is the car, which is what many adventurers strive for. Roger asked the girl what the exact number of levels in the labyrinth were, but unfortunately there was no exact information. The man suggested that they get to the bottom of the labyrinth themselves and find out. Rent by this time remembered that he also had important news. The guy said that he had created a new squad, teaming up with Rinka. They both had a unique gift which had brought a lot of trouble. Nymeria liked the name, and Roger began to think about the appearance of a new squad. Now Roger and Rent are rivals. As they were leaving, the guy thanked him for the treat, after which Roger wanted them to work together. Nymeria chided the man for not telling him the true reason for their meeting, but Roger couldn't invite the boy to join their party because the keeper had already created his own. Roger had a friend some time ago. He made his living as a loan shark and he trusted no one but himself. He made a lot of money that way, but there were people everywhere who hated him. Eventually, someone killed him. Rent had a similar gift. Depending on the situation, there might be someone willing to borrow more than usual. He could easily make a mistake, and Roger was afraid that would happen soon. But now the man is sure that everything will be fine with the keeper. He wanted to know the thoughts of his companion, but she was not there. Nymeria suggested that the protagonist continue the conversation at the bar, but the guy was worried that if he returned too late, he would wake up Rinka. The girl asked about his relationship with her, but Ren explained that they were just friends. The man calmed Nymeria down as he had the first time. While they were arguing, the keeper remembered that he had a favor to ask of the two. As Mappy thought, she and the gentleman have been in Melba for 3 weeks now, and they already have all the information about the debtors. The Central Information Bureau works great. Roast on a spit is served in the guild. It is made from minced meat that is fried in batter. Rinka is delighted with this dish. This stew is considered the signature dish of Melba's guilds. After using the skill, the swordswoman always dies of hunger and loves to eat her fill. According to the fairy, a growing organism needs to eat a lot. Immediately after, Mappy reminded the girl that she needed to show something to Mr. Rent. Rinka rose in rank from F to E. The Guardian was pleased with such results in just 4 days. The girl's magic also rose to 24 units. The swordswoman held a grudge against her gift for a long time, but now she is confident that she can become a real adventurer, and it's all thanks to the main character. Rent had the same attitude towards his gift until recently. The fairy decided to make a gift of sorts for Rinka. Mappy handed her the most delicious thing, a crispy crust. At first, the swordswoman was skeptical about it, but after trying it, her doubts disappeared. The show arranged by Guy shocked Rinka, but the war interested only Rent, whom they had not seen for a long time. The Guardian indifferently asked what Guy needed since their paths had already diverged. These words angered the warrior. Things went downhill for the trio when the Guy started stealing their magic. Misei blamed it all on Rent. Then the protagonist corrected them because he doesn't steal magic just like he didn't give magic, he lent it. The party had no desire to give up magic voluntarily, so the Keeper of Magic had to force them to do so. But then the mage noticed the swordswoman and hurried to find out who she was. Rinka introduced herself as an adventurer who works with Rent. Misei did not immediately believe the girl's words about the Guy. The team began to mock the former team member, but the swordswoman stood up for him. Misei did not like the girl's gaze, so she forced her to lower her eyes. Rent asked to stop, then Guy decided to act. Roger suddenly approached them with the condition that if they were going to fight, they should do it outside. The warrior decided to find out what the man was doing there, but Roger ignored the question, more concerned about the food that had flown onto the floor. Guy attracted the man's attention to accuse Rent of stealing their magic, due to the boy being expelled from the squad. Roger said the same thing the Keeper had said earlier. Then Misei was outraged that the Guy was doing this without their consent. The man checked with Rent, who confirmed but added that they were too aggressive. Roger listened to both sides and said that too much of a fee was also a problem, so he had a solution to that problem. Duel, they can prove their case by fighting. The man was free, so he became a second. Rinka did not understand what this meant. Then the Keeper explained that this was a ritual in which two people settle a dispute by fighting. Guy was happy about this opportunity because if he won, Rent would have to reimburse them for all the magic he stole. The Guy agreed to any conditions of the competition, even 3 against 1. At that moment, Roger and the main character remembered their conversation yesterday. The Guardian asked the man to be a second in the duel. The enemy would be his old squad. Roger was worried that the Guy wanted to fight them alone. Guy and the others will be in Melba before dawn tomorrow. They'll find Rent and want to get to the bottom of this. Then the subject of a duel will come up. They won't listen to the Guy, but if Roger gets involved, they'll change their minds. The man was intrigued and wanted to know how the protagonist knew exactly what time they would arrive. Rent didn't tell about the fairy, but lied that it was just a premonition. The organizer announced that Roger would be a witness and added that the show promised to be interesting. Misei noted with some discomfort that there were many spectators gathered around. Guy confidently replied that it was the perfect stage for a duel and expressed his intention to show them what they were capable of. The boy was amazed by Roger's ability to attract people. At that moment, Jin wished him luck and the Keeper was immensely grateful for that. Jin had put all his money for the week on Rent, so the Guy couldn't lose. The man got into betting again. The organizer asked Mr. Renti and the gentleman from the Sword of the Boundless Sky to announce their bets for the duel. Guy, on behalf of the squad, said that if they won, the Guardian would immediately stop collecting their magic power. Now it was the protagonist's turn. If Rent wins, he will raise the interest rate on the magic he collects. The current rate is 8% for 10 days, and he will raise it to 10%. The magic power loan will be repaid monthly. From tomorrow, the Guy will receive another 90,000 magic power. An interest rate of 10% will be added to this. But the Guy did not have time to announce the final price. Misei guessed but decided to clarify anyway. The main character collected interest every day. These are mandatory payments. Not wanting to wait any longer, the warrior shut the Guy up, hinting at his imminent death. The organizer called the guys to take an oath. They swore that they would submit to the results of this sacred duel. Roger also took the oath as a second. Rinka looked worried. It was assumed that this was the first time she had seen something like this. An oath taken in a duel is unbreakable. It is not just a promise. If you break it, there will be serious consequences. The girls had not met each other personally before, but they had a good idea of who was standing in front of them. Namiria told about the previous evening spent with Rent. She decided to embellish the events of the evening a little to joke with the girl. Rinka didn't get the joke, which made Namiria very amused. Rinka just needed to trust the Guy because he would definitely win. The swordswoman agreed, Suddenly, a fairy appeared who had something to say. Mr. Rent will never lose. The girl was surprised by such wording, but at that moment Roger announced the beginning of the duel. The crowd chants for the duel to begin. The hero stands in front of a guy in armor and with a large sword. Behind the guy stand two girls, one black-haired, one blonde. A girl with dark hair and a guy open small bottles and drink from them. People don't understand why they drink a restoration potion when the duel has just begun. A white-haired girl named Elle also drinks after them. Her teammates look on worriedly. After drinking everything and breathing heavily, the girl declares that if they finish the hero, then she is ready to endure. The hero looks at the group and says he'll wait until they're drunk. The guy in armor accuses him of bullying. The hero thinks about how they still rely on magic. The boy remembers that when he ran out of magic, they made him drink a recovery potion as well. They poured the drink into him to restore the amount of magic to give. He curses at them, remembering this unpleasant feeling. Because the boy is lost in thought, he misses the moment when the knight begins to attack, swinging his sword. He is torn from his thoughts by a scream from one of the spectators. The attack falls on the place where the guy is standing and a powerful explosion occurs. Stones fly in all directions and among them is an object in the form of a piggy bank. Those who watch this are blown away by the blast wave. The girl calls out to Rent worriedly. After the attack, clouds of dust swirl around. The pig falls to the floor. The girl knight watching this with horror says the name Rent. The man who bet on the boy is approached by others and told that he will return everything with interest. The knight smirks smugly. The knight is proud that he defeated the boy with one blow. The dark-haired girl calls the boy Guy and says that he overdid it. He smiles and says that the white-haired girl named Elle's defense also worked well. Guy turns to the other guy, Roger, and says they're incredibly cool, but the guy frowns at him and the knight doesn't understand why. Something's wrong with the pig. A fireball appears behind the knight. The dark-haired girl shouts at him to turn around. She manages to conjure a shield and protect them. They wonder where the attack came from. A girl from the audience says that with Roger no one would dare to interfere in the duel. The girl and Guy turn around and see a silhouette in the clouds of dust. They realize that it was Rent's attack, and the girl directs a fire tornado towards him. The hero dodges, emerging from the smoke with a small dagger in his hand. He disables the sorceress and she falls to the ground. The knight shouts her name, calling her Miss A. Rent picks up the pig. Guy yells for Elle to get the sorceress to her feet, but she doesn't have time, and the guy attacks the white-haired girl with a 3x fireball. The people watching the fight are amazed that Rent used 3 spells at once and a higher level. The girl who made the remark earlier admiringly tells everyone to watch the hero. Guy asks how he did it. Gritting his teeth, Guy thinks about how he's not in the best shape. The knight wonders how Rent remained unharmed after his attack. The boy comes at them with a pig in one hand and a dagger in the other. A girl in the crowd with a fairy on her head says that Rent is amazing and wonders if the infinite storage of magic helped him. The fairy replies that it was hard work. She remembers how at night she and her boyfriend, sitting in the room, studied the offered goods, happy that they had saved up the necessary amount. Rent chooses what he needs to buy for it. He buys the skill Creditor's Protection, which becomes permanently active. The guy is sure that with this skill the outcome of the duel is predetermined. He realizes that it took a lot of time, but he is sure that it will be useful in the future. Rent explains that even if the enemy attacks, he will be able to use this skill to defend himself. Already in battle, he reflects on the fact that the effect nullifies the debtor's attacks up to a certain level of damage. He also thinks that the amount of damage that is nullified is proportional to the debtor's payment. Guy attacks the guy with a vacuum strike. The sword reaches the boy but does not harm him. Rent calmly looks at the weapon near his shoulder and comments on how it is made of mithril but falls apart. The boy jokingly asks if the knight is taking good care of it. The fairy says that the attackers owe them millions, so they won't be able to even scratch Rent. The guy at this time suggests that their priority is to restore their strength, so there is not enough money for repair fluid. With one movement of his hand, the boy breaks the knight's sword. Someone from the crowd notices that the blade has broken and is flying towards them. The sword fragment is caught by a knight with a hidden face and long white hair. He looks at the piece and wonders if he can sell it. Guy holds what's left of his weapon with trembling hands, looks at his crippled comrades and screams in rage. He goes on the attack again, shouting that he will not lose to Rent, and another explosion occurs. The guy parries the blow and the knight flies to the ground. The spectators shout that they have a winner and think Rent is cool. The girl who was rooting for him can't believe her eyes. Guy, lying on his back, groans in pain and sees the hero with a terrible face approaching him, looking down. Rent tells him to give up his magic. The knight tries to answer and mumbles that he has used up all his skills. The hero then kicks him in the face. The girl with the fairy and the one standing next to her watch the events with great intensity. Rent shuts Guy up and says that such is life, pointing a dagger at him. He puts the weapon to the knight's face and talks out loud about how he now has 3 souls. The guy also wonders how much they will cost and whether the price will pay off their debt. Rent threatens him that if this happens, Guy's soul will leave the circle of reincarnation and will wander in an eternal cold void. Then, smiling frighteningly, the guy declares that it is no longer his problem. The frightened knight tries to stop him. Guy looks at him and doesn't recognize him, asking who he is. Rent's face contorts into a grimace and he chuckles. In the vision, Rent puts another coin in the piggy bank. He shakes the object next to his face. The pig notes that he has saved enough and then asks if this amount is enough. The hero replies negatively and says that he wants more. He shows the pig his former teammates dividing up the money and says that they have everything. He pounces on the bags of coins with crazy eyes, screaming for them to give him everything because it belongs to him. Someone tries to call him, but he is too involved in taking money and pushing away his offenders. He is brought out of his trance by a girl with a ponytail who was rooting for him. She hugs him from behind, screaming the hero's name. The boy realizes that he is on a battlefield and that Rinka is hugging him. The girl does not let him go and gently tells him to calm down because he won. Rent freezes, realizing what is happening. He looks at the beaten and scattered opponents lying unconscious on the field. Roger announces that the duel is over and proclaims Rent the winner. The guy looks around in confusion. Roger approaches the boy, saying that it was magnificent. He looks at the state of the defeated and notes the ruthlessness of the battle, saying that he thought the hero would act more carefully. A girl in a white dress with long black hair says it gave her goosebumps. Rent doesn't understand and admits he doesn't remember anything. At that moment, other friends come up to him and say it was cool. They say that he was a real demon, and at the end of the duel, he sent a dozen fireballs in their direction. The guy asks in amazement if he really did it. Roger assures Rent that the enemies are alive and will be taken care of by the guild representatives. The dark-haired girl points out that the guy could have ended the fight earlier since it brought Rinka to tears. Roger reminds him what he hates the most. Looking at how the defeated are treated, the man cannot stand people who do such terrible things to those whom they themselves betrayed and adds that they deserve it. The allies tell Rent that the reason he lost his memory is because he got so angry that he lost control of himself. The boy frowns at them. Memories of past miserable days with his former teammates come flooding back to Rent's mind, and he confirms that perhaps this is what happened. At this moment, a short-haired girl who had also supported him earlier attacks him from behind. The guy gets scared. He recognizes her as Comet. The girl asks him to teach her how to create such fireballs. The guy replies that this is only possible with his gift. She screams that nothing is impossible for her. Roger takes the girl off the hero's back and tells her to calm down a bit because he has enough problems. They once again turn their attention to the opponents who are in the process of being treated. A woman with a bucket approaches them. The injured try to get up and are doused with liquid from a bucket. Guy screams that it burns. The woman replies that it is a potion for wounds, but it is unclean and full of impurities. He reproachfully says that he, as a wounded man, must be treated with care. The woman throws out with disgust that he is a pain in the ass and that is why they save on them. The girls and the guy look at her with displeasure. At this point, Rent comes closer. They turn to the guy standing there holding the piggy bank and shy away in fear. He confidently says that he has won. The guy says that according to the agreement, he is raising the rate by 10%. The opponents begin to complain, noting that they will not pay more than they spent. At that very moment, a discharge pierces them and they begin to choke from pain. The observers say that the oath in a duel is unbreakable and otherwise, lives will be at stake. Guy looks at Rent with a veil in his eyes and says that he understands. Guy keeps repeating that he has realized everything. Rent holds the piggy bank between his hands and uses a spell to extend the contract. The back of the opponent's neck begins to glow. A mark appears on his neck. The guy tells them that soon it will be the 7th month and he will be able to take back the 90,000 he borrowed, but notes that it will not be enough. Rent concludes that they have 9 days to return 153,139 units with interest. The hero looks at the heavily breathing people and says that even if the 3 of them restore the magic with the bracelets, they will still need about 38,000. Rent turns away and advises them to drink potions to make up for the shortfall. Elle complains that they have almost no money. Guy is even more indignant. As he leaves, Rent confidently says that they will have to drink about 77 bottles. The knight shouts that potions do not grow on trees. Yousei asks what will happen if they fail. Rent coolly says that in that case it will be the end of them. He adds that it is not for him to give them advice and that they, as debtors, cannot harm him, the creditor. The guy notes that it's all thanks to his skill. Gaia, gritting her teeth, understands why the hero didn't flinch from his attacks. In front of everyone, Rent says that the heroes must do everything in the next 10 days to pay him back. They say nothing. The opponents look at the guy tensely, declaring that this is not the end. The hero and his friends celebrate their victory in a tavern and the sound of mugs clinks. The man who bet on Rent thanks him for getting rich. The guy responds to the thanks with doubt, wondering what would happen if he lost. At this moment, someone congratulates the guy. It is a group called Two-Headed Silver Wolf, led by a white-haired guy and a girl in armor. The girl greets the hero. The guy notes that he didn't know they were in Melba. They say they came on a mission. The girl says they were in the same carriage with his duelists. The boy says they refused, as rumors said. The girl adds that they are rude. They say they have never seen B-class adventurers who fight orcs so badly. 2 girls in their group ask if he won and say they want to see him win. The man, on the other hand, confidently says that Rent is the star of the show tonight and they need a victory speech. The guy is embarrassed. He begins to talk about how when he was kicked out of his previous squad, he was in despair, but fate blessed him with loyal friends and he was able to start over as an adventurer. Everyone listens attentively to his speech. The guy bows and shyly says that he hopes for their support and understanding. There is silence for a second, and then a flurry of voices from all sides begin to support him and tell him not to be afraid of his opponents anymore, and also to express the hope that they will become friends. Roger tells the black-haired girl that the guy is funny. She replies that it's just like him. Rinka and the hero exchange glances and the girl smiles sweetly. Rent and Rinka are sitting separately at a table, and she thanks the guy for everything. The fairy says that she was right when she had no doubt in his victory. The fairy rather assumes that the enemy's pride has burst after such a defeat. The boy also hopes so. Rinka notes that the boy was great, but adds that she was a little scared. Rent apologizes. She remembers the time he said he lost his memory. The guy notes that he was told he was so angry that he lost his mind. Rent becomes momentarily serious and says he doubts that this is true. He remembers being overcome by an emotion other than anger. He remembers the piggy bank. The guy says it was like another personality, full of malice. The girl is very surprised by this assumption and the fairy smiles slyly. It is getting dark outside. Rinka fights off the bloodthirsty monsters, wielding her sword. Rent runs up to her and praises her. The girl turns around and notes that this is not all and that she has become stronger. At that moment the girl is shot in the side. Her eyes widen. The blow is delivered by a terrible monster in the form of a human skeleton with 4 limbs. As the girl falls, the guy anxiously shouts her name. The boy remembers all this while sitting on his bed at night in his room. The fairy asks him what happened. He answers that memories came into his head. She guesses that it was a fit of rage. Rent also remembers that Rinka destroyed a wave of goblins and fought while losing her mind. The guy assumes that their unique abilities are very dangerous. The fairy assures him that there is nothing to worry about because everything depends on how they are used and they also have her. The girl also notes his frightened appearance. He denies his fear, a small argument ensues, and eventually they fall silent because they hear a knock on the door. The guy opens the door and behind it stands Rinka in a tight black suit. She apologizes for the late call. They sit together on his bed and she shares that she has nightmares every night. The girl admits that thanks to him, she feels like she is growing every day. Rinka shudders as she recalls the day the skeleton broke her sword and can't get that moment out of her head. The guy replies that he ended his fears in his own way during the duel. He says that he understood from the behavior of his former comrades that they do not want to return magic. Rent claims that in 10 days everything will be over and now it's time to help Rinka with her fear. He assures that the girl will defeat this skeleton. The day comes and they go out into the city. Rinka looks at the flower beds and says that they are beautiful. A cat girl stands next to her and tells her that Melba is a city where people from all over the world come and where you can buy seeds of all kinds of flowers. The girl recognizes the flowers as Gremilata and Melba's morning glory. Rinka notes that one of them blooms in the morning and the other in the evening, so they divide the flower beds according to the time of day when the flowers bloom. The girl asks delightedly how she figured this out and how she knows so much. At this moment, the main character calls out to her in a new outfit and greets Rinka, apologizing for being late. He has a belt over his shoulder with a piggy bank attached to it. He asks if the girl needs new armor. She replies that she has tried everything, but the gear she wears seems the most comfortable. The hero understands. Then a little girl runs up to them and asks if they are looking for armor. The heroes hesitantly agree. The girl notices the katana on Rinka's side. The girl wonders if she is a samurai and, grabbing her hand, drags her aside, saying that they need to come to their store. The child leads Rinka along and shouts that they have all the products that are perfect for her. The cat girl smiles and notes that Suzu is as active as ever. They find themselves in the Yagu store. There are many interesting objects around, and the hero says that he has never seen anything like it. The girl happily greets them again. The child explains that this store deals with goods related to the countries of the Far East, but does not have time to finish speaking when the hero, who is examining the vase, finishes for her. Rinka tries on a samurai helmet. The girl asks her what she thinks of it. The child notes that the helmet was worn by the shogun himself, the highest-ranking samurai. The girl awkwardly says that it is too heavy, starting to swing from side to side, and part of the helmet crashes into the tanuki sculpture. The girl looks at the damaged thing in shock, and Rinka apologizes profusely. Suzu says that everything is fine because they have another one. The guy does not really believe these words. The girl offers a vessel, advertising it and noting that if used in battle, it can make the enemy lose the will to fight, and also shows dumplings that subdue the enemy who eats them. The goods terrify the guy. He says doubtfully that it's time for them to go, but Suzu grabs him by the waist. The girl says that she won't let them go without a purchase. She puts a mask on Rent and notes that with it he will dance better than anyone else at the party. The guy shouts at Rinka to leave. The girl stands near a beautiful cape hanging on the wall and looks at it with admiration. Rent calls out to her again. She looks at the floral patterns on it, and someone from the side says that it is a kimono. A man comes out of the back room and notes that it is a kabute and that it is hand-painted with blood. He approaches and says that the fabric is thin, but if magic is run through it, it will become good armor. The girl looks at it in amazement. The man greets the heroes, noting that they haven't had customers in a long time. The child says that she brought them. He reproachfully notes that she used force again, and she replies that at least she is doing something. Then the seller turns to Rinka. He notices the girl's katana and asks if she is a samurai. Rinka refuses. The guy asks what a samurai is. The man explains that these are warriors from the Far East who fight in close combat and chop down their opponents with katanas. He notes that their equipment is a kimono, and at one time, having fallen in love with its beauty, he brought it here. Rinka says that maybe they have similar fighting styles. Rent excitedly asks the girl if this equipment will fit her equipment. She agrees and asks how much it costs. The man slyly replies that, according to a rough estimate, the price is 2.5 million. The girl is shocked by such figures. Suzu shouts that this is the reason why he doesn't buy anything from them. The man replies that if it weren't such a rare thing, he would lower the price. Rinka points out that they can't afford it. Rent asks if the armor is really worth that much. The man assures him that it is the best fabric they can find and guarantees its quality. The guy puts a big bag of money on the counter and says he'll take it. The girl screams his name in shock. The hero decided that Rinka would wear the best armor and that it was a small price to pay for such a thing. The girl tries to object, but he replies that if anything, they can always earn some money in the dungeon, and also notes how she looked at the kimono. He is sure that it was her love at first sight. Rinka is very embarrassed and tries to say something. The child shouts that as their most important customer, he is getting a mask as a gift. The man invites Rinka to follow him and they go deeper into the store. They end up in a backyard and the girl is given a wooden sword. The man says he hasn't received such orders for a long time and would like to have a sparring match because then he can adjust the kimono to her needs and movements. Rent asks the girl if her father is strong. She agrees and notes that at least he gets pleasure from it. The guy wonders if everything will be okay since the girl has only fought monsters. He muses that fighting a human might be a motivator for Rinka. The man takes a fighting stance. The fight begins. They stand ready and the man says they are starting. Rent and Suzu watch tensely. The man makes the first lunge towards Rinka. He attacks her in the shoulder and she deftly dodges. She makes a counterattack and the man manages to block it. The boy and the child watch the battle with interest. They continue to attack each other one after another. Rent says that the girl's father is really good. She notes that Rinka is also a good fighter. After another blow, the man tells the girl not to hold back and show her true strength. She starts to launch attack after attack. The man only manages to parry them. The man thinks she is fast enough but has not yet shown her true colors. He raises his sword. The seller delivers a powerful blow, but the girl manages to put up a good block. Her whole body trembles and suddenly the thought comes to her that the fight is getting serious. The girl's look and mood changes and the man feels it. She begins to attack more aggressively and with precision. Rent recognizes the feeling and curses in concern. The girl doesn't understand what happened. Rinka rushes at the man with her powerful attack and he smiles. The man parries and with one powerful blow, knocks the sword out of the girl's hands. Her katana flies over her head and falls to the ground. She looks at her fighting partner in shock. The boy and Suzu look at what is happening in amazement. Rinka does not fully understand what happened. The seller apologizes for being rude to her. The man, out of breath, says that if they had continued like this, the fight would have been to the death. Rinka apologizes, but the shopkeeper tells her not to worry about it. It was a beautiful fight. He asks the girl what her gift is. She replies that it is the way of Usura. The man recognizes this style, named after the deity. The man introduces himself as a 21st generation Yagyu Lindo and asks her name. She politely gives it to him. The salesman says that after thinking about it all, he wants to show her a product that would be perfect for her. She thanks him and they go back into the house. There they see a variety of fabrics. The man asks what patterns she prefers. She says admiringly that she likes flowers. She asks if he has any floral patterns, but not ones that are too feminine or delicate. The man thinks, then shows a fabric with a fiery red floral pattern and explains that in the language of flowers they mean courage. Taking the girl's measurements, Suzu says that she is very strong because her father has not made such efforts in a long time. The girl notes that the man looks like a master of fencing and asks if he was a master of the sword. She replies that it is his hobby. She says that when the man was young, he became an apprentice to a kimono maker and trained in the dojo of the warriors who wore his work, which is where his skill came from. Suzu notes that his gift is fire magic and that the man says it is useful for making fires. The girl listens attentively. The child says that there are 5 years left until her coming-of-age ceremony. Suzu is interested in what gift she will receive and says that she would like a gift related to trade. The guy and Rinka are walking along a busy city street and Rent says that everything will be ready in a day. The girl is really looking forward to it. The hero turns to her. He asks if she likes flowers because she had a special reaction to them when she was choosing fabrics and also talked to others about flower beds. She admits with a dreamy smile that she wanted to become a florist when she was a child. The guy looks at her in amazement. The girl says that in her hometown there was a wonderful flower shop and flowers always lifted her spirits. She thought that she could make customers just as happy and delight them with beautiful flowers. She regrets that during the coming-of-age ceremony, she had to give up her dream. Rinka understands that they do not always receive the gifts they desire and that she could follow her dream despite her gift if it were not for the voice. She says that there is a voice in her heart that assures her that she must defeat the enemy and that she must fight. The girl tries to ignore it, but it makes her head hurt. The guy looks at the girl with regret. She notes that her gift brought her not only pain, but also joy. She says she learned this from Rent. The girl admits that she is afraid to fight her old enemy, but she knows that she must do it and will not run away anymore. She confidently declares that this is her destiny, which she must follow. Rent confirms her words with a smile. The guy says that after all, he is a true creditor and will follow her to the ends of the earth until she repays the debt. At this time, in some tavern, a large bag of money falls in front of two men. It is Gaius who hires the assassins. He gives the men 100,000 gold pieces up front and adds that the reward will be 10 million later. One of the men asks who they are to kill. Misei, standing behind the knight, says Rent's name and describes him as a moron with a battered piggy bank on his belt. The man recognizes the name and asks if he was the one who recently beat up 3 B-class adventurers and asks him to remind him who it was. He is reminded that these are the losers from Unlimited Sky. Guy is indignant and the men cheerfully say that they are too famous in a bad way. The men say that even though they do dirty work, they are not stupid enough to be at odds with Meteor Shower and note that the group is behind him. Mila indignantly calls them weaklings and says they will find someone else grabbing the bag, but one of the men intercepts it. He says that this is payment for refusing their services. The other offers to tell everyone about their order. He picks up the bag and tells the entire tavern that the Sword of the Boundless Sky wants to take revenge at their hands and names the price at 100,000 gold. Everyone turns around and looks in their direction. The visitors mock them and remark that revenge for the duel is pathetic and that they should give up. Guy is shaking with anger and Misei tells him to leave. They enter the room. Guy kicks a chair in anger and spits poison at the mercenaries. Elle notes that they did not fulfill their request and took the money. The knight says that in the past they would have beaten them. Misei replies that it is impossible for them now. Elle exclaims about what they should do now since that money is all they have. She complains that they don't even have enough for a room. Guy says that they will have to work in the dungeon. Misei says that they sold everything and Guy notes the bracelet on his hand. He offers to sell the jewel. The black-haired girl grabs hers and refuses because with it, they can get 3,000 units of magic. Guy asks if she really cares about it. He looks at the things, smiling, and says that now they need money, and for the price of such a rare item they can buy hundreds of potions. The appraiser at the store looks at them and says they're worth 6,000 gold. Misei and Guy start arguing with the man about the price of the thing and he doesn't believe them, saying that it's just a cheap bracelet. Elle sighs tiredly and complains that she's hungry. There are 8 days left until Rent's due date.